The city of Welkom in the Free State Province is the youngest and most dynamically developing city in South Africa. It was founded in 1947, following the discovery of the largest gold deposit in the area the previous year. Its name translates from Afrikaans, one of the country's official languages, as greeting. Despite its welcoming name and its industry-forming gold mining, it gained widespread attention due to a grievous crime that occurred there in 2011. When the criminals were identified, the prosecution was baffled. This notorious case became the 10th in the history of international criminal activity. During the investigation, it was discovered that the case involved followers of Satanism and occultism. Michael Van Eck was born on August 14, 1987, in the young and developing city for gold miners. He became the only brother to 4 sisters, Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Hendriana. The boy grew up in a large and close-knit family. His parents were caring and loving people. To provide a decent life for their children, the head of the family worked hard and organized his own business. The mother created a favorable atmosphere in the home for the growth and development of the younger generation. Michael was sociable and kind, showed diligence in school and sports. He even earned a black belt in karate, which he was very proud of. This gave him confidence and resilience. After finishing school, the young man trained as an electrician. This in-demand profession opened the doors to good earnings and promising work. The young man worked in his field at mine number 4 of the Beatrix mine in the small town of Unison. He did not stop there and continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, the 23-year-old hero of our story registered on a dating site. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from a breakup and make new acquaintances. It seemed that luck smiled at him one day. Among the numerous photos and profiles, a lonely young man took a fancy to the profile of a sweet and smiling girl. During the ensuing correspondence, the guy learned that their interests coincided. She, like him, disliked noisy parties and drunk companies and wanted to find true love and build a strong family. Michael was pleasantly surprised that he could find a suitable candidate on the internet. Since the young man still lived with his parents, he shared his joys and concerns with his mother. On April 2nd, the son boasted to her that he was going on a date, and he prepared thoroughly for it. To please the girl, he withdrew his first paycheck of 1,000 rand from his card. The only thing that troubled the young man was the unusual place his friend chose for their first meeting. It was the city cemetery. Apparently not to worry his parents, he kept quiet about it. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Michael said goodbye to his family and left the house. He headed to the designated place in the silver Peugeot 207, a gift from his parents for his coming of age. As tradition demanded, the girl was a little late, but her appearance was impressive. The stranger from the internet arrived in a pristine white dress and smiled. The conversation was relaxed, after which she suggested continuing the evening further and invited the young man to a distant part of the cemetery. There, a meadow awaited them with a spread blanket. On it lay a basket of fruits and wine. After the young people had a glass each, the beautiful companion kissed a stunned Michael. Suddenly, the pleasant feeling of the kiss turned to pain and horror. The unsuspecting young man became part of a sinister plan, since the innocent appearance of his pen pal did not match her inner world. Chama van Heerden was born in 1991 during a crisis period for her parents. When her mother found out she was pregnant, the couple decided to delay their divorce and give their relationship another chance. However, their attempts to reconcile and improve their life together were unsuccessful. The family environment only worsened. Her mother openly disliked the little girl, seeing her as a tie to her husband. After the divorce, she took the children and moved away from her former husband. However, the failed marriage was not the main reason for her coldness. She continued to lack love and attention towards her children, even after the relationship ended. All 3 children felt lonely and misunderstood, but Chana suffered the most. She grew up withdrawn and sullen. From an early age, she exhibited psychological issues. She talked about death and drew incomprehensible pictures. Eventually, the little girl developed an imaginary friend named Azazel. Concerned about their daughter's behavior, her grandparents thought she was possessed. Thus, they decided to take her to church, where she underwent an exorcism ritual. According to a witness, her body convulsed during the prayers. In reality, Chana was scared of crowds and clearly frightened by the ordeal. The shock could have triggered an epileptic seizure. The traumatic event deeply impacted the young girl's memory, causing her to develop a fear of the dark. Additionally, her mother once told her that toys come to life at night, which led the frightened daughter to tape her doll's eyes shut and tie their bodies with shoelaces. As she grew older, her mental condition worsened. At age 10, she nearly harmed a house guest with a knife while visiting her father. Only after this incident did they seek psychiatric help for Chana. Following a specialist's evaluation, she was prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive effect on her mood and well-being. She became calmer and more friendly. During a remission period, her father spent more time with his daughter. He often picked her up from school and took her hunting with him. By sharing his hobby, he aimed to give her the attention she lacked. The unstable teenager enjoyed her father's activity. She later confessed that she found pleasure in butchering carcasses and skinning animals. This led her to bring home dead animals, starting with rats and birds and eventually progressing to cats and dogs. She enjoyed cutting flesh and occasionally inflicted injuries on herself. During an investigation, her sister revealed that at age 12, Chana befriended an older man who introduced her to forbidden substances and took advantage of her condition. Her sisters did not inform their parents, but Chana ended the destructive relationship. This experience undoubtedly had a negative impact on her troubled psyche. At age 15, her mother moved to New Zealand, where she met another man and stayed with him. Over time, she never returned for her children. They remained with their father and stepmother, who tried their best to provide for the children, though they did not fully understand the severity of the youngest daughter's issues. Her behavior was largely attributed to adolescence. The situation worsened a year later, when Chana became involved with a 22-year-old young man interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. The boyfriend became a real mentor to the impressionable young woman, but he was cruel in character, often suppressing and demeaning her. Nonetheless, a supportive family environment and psychotherapy yielded positive results. By her 17th birthday, Chana's life began to improve. She broke off dangerous connections, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college where she studied art and graphic design. After Chana lost interest in Satanism and stopped using forbidden substances, her emotional state improved. She excelled in her studies and secured a job in her field. At her new job, Chana found support not only from her colleagues, but also from management. It turned out she had a real talent for visual arts, which brought her respect and recognition in her professional field. At the same time, she started dating a man named Warren. To outsiders, her life appeared completely normal. Her family and close friends did not discuss her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, what was happening in her soul was hard to say. Perhaps her inner demons were merely lying dormant. Her father was the happiest for Chana. He hoped that she had finally matured and would soon marry. However, his expectations were not met. The obstacle emerged from an unexpected source. Warren had a friend named Roy who considered himself highly sensitive. Despite Chana's sweet and friendly demeanor, he sensed something repellent and malevolent in her. Yet Roy's words were not taken seriously, as her outward appearance did not match his perceptions. One day, he pulled her aside and asked, "Who is Norman?" Each time he saw her, this name popped into the clairvoyant's mind. The young man thought she might not be faithful to his friend, so he decided to ask her directly. In response, Chana unexpectedly spat in his face and demanded he stop bothering her with foolish questions. It later became known that Norman was the second name of Azazel, her imaginary childhood friend. Following the incident, the dynamics between the young people changed. At one of the parties, Chana's attention shifted to a 24-year-old named Martins. Although the young man was generally calm and sociable, there were unpleasant rumors about him. Martins van der Merwe. Martins van der Merwe was born into a well-off and respected family. Unlike Chana, he had excellent relationships with both parents. As a child, he was smart and well-mannered, performing well academically. However, it turned out that since the age of 6, he had been suffering from a mental illness. Around that time, he began experiencing hallucinations. His parents recounted that according to their son, a certain entity appeared to him, convincing the boy that he was endowed with incredible strength. Martins believed this and felt special. Gradually, his mental condition worsened, and his behavior changed. Due to problems at school and home, at the age of 14, van der Merwe was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conventional treatment did not help. Since the family was financially secure, his parents dedicated all their efforts to finding effective medications. Thanks to the efforts of both family and doctors, the necessary drugs were eventually found. With these, nearly all deviations were controlled, except for sporadic outbursts of aggression. Martins once witnessed a stray cat being mauled by dogs. It made a deep impression on him. Instead of feeling disgust or pity, he hid the animal's body and watched it. This led him to start torturing animals. He later dropped out of school and began helping his father in the carpentry shop. In the future, Martins dreamed of continuing the family tradition. While working, his condition improved. He no longer wanted to do bad things to animals and take their lives. For this reason, he stopped taking medication. Everyone was wary of his decision, but the young man insisted that the disease had receded and that he was in control. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an inevitable mistake: general insanity. His mental state gradually deteriorated. It was around this time that Martins met Chana. These unstable young people found each other and began dating. However, outwardly they looked happy, so their parents were happy with their relationship. Of course, neither of them admitted to the problems their children had faced in the past. In the end, their union led to horrifying consequences. At first, the couple was open to the outside world, socializing and attending parties. Acquaintances recalled that they sometimes noticed cuts on the hands of young people. They joked that they were engaged in intimate experiments. After that, they began to distance themselves from people. They became interested in Satanism, voodoo cults, and occult practices. They also became interested in infamous serial criminals. In February 2011, Martins posted a picture with Chana on one of his social media pages. The pair were hugging, and the caption under the photo read, "Killers," with an ambiguous emoji. At the time, no one took their post seriously. Eventually, the young man asked his girlfriend's father for a marriage license. Mr. Van Heerden was incredibly happy. No one could have imagined what terrible dreams the couple nurtured. Instead of dreaming of traveling and children, they wanted to end their lives. Gradually, their sick fantasies turned into a bloodthirsty plan. The crazy couple decided to torture the homeless to death, and they practiced on animals. However, their plan was never realized, as the criminals could not find a suitable victim. Their monstrous plan was waiting for the right moment. The encounter. It all began when Chana posted her profile on a dating site. Before long, a young man named Michael Van Eck responded. The attractive young man caught the interest of the nefarious couple, and Chana targeted him for their plans. From the very first messages, the young people started flirting. After a few days of communication, the girl suggested they meet. Michael had been looking forward to this, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon or directly from her. Unfortunately, the somewhat unusual location for their first date didn't raise any alarms for him. Apparently, he was so eager to meet the charming conversationalist from the internet in person that he agreed to the dubious proposal. Chana and Martins meticulously prepared to bring their wild dream to life. They thought through everything thoroughly: the attire, the means to end a life, and even the setting. Chana approached the date fully prepared. The trap. The long-awaited meeting went exactly as planned for both parties. The victim fell for the bait. An angelic appearance of the girl and a kiss lulled his alertness. This gesture was the agreed-upon signal for Martins. All this time, the man had been hiding behind the tombstones. He approached Michael from behind and struck him with a knife. Unexpectedly for everyone, the young man resisted. The attackers hadn't anticipated this. Noticing that their new acquaintance was putting up a desperate fight, Chana intervened. Altogether, they inflicted about 30 knife wounds on the unfortunate young man. Ultimately, completely weakened, Michael begged them to end his suffering. Pleased with their conquest, Martin slit his throat. After that, the unthinkable began. The perpetrators dragged the body onto the blanket and proceeded with their plan. The couple severed the young man's right and left legs at the knee and decapitated him. The severed parts were placed in bags. They then decided to hide the body at the site. However, they miscalculated one thing: they had no shovels. Thus, they had to dig the earth with their hands and knives. As a result, they could not make the grave deep enough. After burying the body halfway, the perpetrators left with their trophies. Along the way, they used the victim's vehicle. Martins initially took the wheel, but later handed control over to his companion. The surge of adrenaline prevented him from keeping his eyes on the road. Upon arriving home, they stored the bags with body parts in the refrigerator as if they were groceries. After Van der Merwe had somewhat recovered, he started Michael's car and drove it to a troubled neighborhood. The criminals hoped the car would be stolen, so he left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. The victim. The next day, a cemetery worker noticed a fresh burial that wasn't there the day before. His dreadful suspicions were confirmed when he stumbled upon bloody traces and torn clothing in the bushes. He then called over his supervisor to examine the grave. What the unintended witnesses found would long remain etched in their memory. Beneath the soil lay a dismembered male body. The authorities were immediately notified of the grim discovery. At the same time, Michael's parents were beside themselves with worry. Since the previous evening, he hadn't responded to calls, even if it was presumed that he had stayed overnight at his internet girlfriend's place. He should have made contact by now. Instead, Michael's workplace called his parents. The concerned management wanted to understand why he was absent from a crucial site. At the same time, the police received a report about a Peugeot 207 found abandoned in a parking lot. Passers-by were alarmed by the bloodstains on the trunk. After running the vehicle through their database, the owner was identified. Detectives also tracked that before its discovery, the car had been at the cemetery for a long time. The local precinct was already aware of an unidentified body found on its grounds. All signs were suspicious. Armed with this information, law enforcement officials went to the residence of Michael Van Eck. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed their suspicions. His parents had been searching for the young man since the previous day. They asked Michael's mother to come to the cemetery, where forensic specialists and search dogs were already at work, desperately trying to locate missing body parts. At the scene, the woman recognized belongings found, and she also identified her son's body by distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. During the autopsy, the medical examination confirmed that the young man had suffered numerous knife wounds. Signs of his struggle were evident. It was also determined that the body had been dismembered post-mortem. At least the perpetrators had the mercy not to do this while he was still alive. Meanwhile, experts noted that the dismemberment was performed with professional precision, indicating that the perpetrators had significant experience in this area. There was no doubt that multiple attackers were involved. The number of wounds, their nature, and the strength required to subdue the victim clearly demonstrated this. Ultimately, DNA testing confirmed the identity of 23-year-old Michael Van Eck. Time to gather stones. During the investigation, police confiscated the victim's cell phone and computer. It was established that the last person the young man had communicated with was Chama Van Heerden. According to their messages, she was the one who invited him to the ominous date at the cemetery. Subsequently, detectives contacted the potential suspect and invited her to give a statement. The young woman did not refuse and arrived with her boyfriend, Martins Van der Merwe. The couple was interviewed separately. During the questioning, they confessed to being involved in the group ending of a life. Upon learning of the incident, the girl's father rushed to the station. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked his daughter if she really was involved in the accusations against her. Chana calmly confirmed and added that she would willingly do it again. She claimed she had dreamt of this ever since she started hunting with him. The cruel confession of the seemingly sweet girl shocked not only her father but everyone present. Her boyfriend Martins also behaved defiantly. As the case gained public attention, he did not hide his pleasure from the public scrutiny and posed for the cameras. It was clear that none of the accused felt remorse for their actions. It turned out that after the crime, if caught, the mad couple planned to end their lives. But the young man changed his mind, and his partner followed suit. They wanted to live, the lair of monsters. During the search of the young couple's apartment, police felt uneasy, to say the least. The environment was horrifying. The walls were adorned with portraits of Chana, depicting her in various guises. In some, she was depicted without eyes, in others without a mouth or ears. All images of the girl were distorted. Additionally, the rooms contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and various objects of unclear purpose. Also found were belongings of the deceased young man, glasses, and a wallet. As Martins later confessed, they took Michael's money to buy necessary items for their next crime. However, the most horrifying discovery awaited in the refrigerator. From it, police retrieved Michael's head with the mouth sewn shut. It was assumed that the couple planned to use the young man's head as a ritual bowl later on. Eyes and ears of the victim were stored in separate containers. The victim's hand and leg were found buried near the murderer's home, alongside the bodies of various animals. The girl's diary contained horrific thoughts and their impending realization. From everything discovered during the inspection, it was clear that the couple planned not just one more crime. The process of ending lives and subsequent mutilation of bodies provided them with unimaginable pleasure. Martins and Chana underwent multiple evaluations for mental competence. Fortunately, the commission confirmed that the young individuals were aware of their actions and desired the inevitable consequences. Otherwise, they might have avoided punishment and received only mandatory treatment. Punishment. In November 2011, the trial concerning Chana took place, treating her as a serial offender. Despite this being a singular incident, she did not hide her desire to repeat her actions. She told the court that she understands she should feel shame or remorse, but for some reason, she does not. She can only grasp the gravity of her actions through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists declared that the defendant suffers from psychopathic and antisocial disorders, apparently more dangerous than her boyfriend, but adept at concealing it. Throughout the sentencing, she remained impassive. Chana Van Heerden was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for ending a life and an additional 15 for robbery and dismemberment. As for Martins van der Merwe, unlike his partner, he defended himself in court. He claimed not to remember the events that occurred until he found himself in jail and behaved arrogantly and aggressively. The defendant admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, trying to understand life and death. He said his relationship with Chana pushed them both towards committing the crime. During the trial, he apologized to the victim's parents, although his words sounded insincere. He implied that the victim was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, although in reality, the mad couple had lured the unfortunate man into a premeditated trap. Michael's mother could not contain her distress and struck the accused during one of the sessions. Ultimately, Martins van der Merwe was also found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to 35 years in prison, but with a chance for parole after serving half of his sentence. Life after. Until 2014, the lovers kept in touch behind bars. In his letters, Martins called Chana a dark goddess, writing, "Lady Blackmore, when you part your lips, words of a dead butterfly spell out. They fall upon my mystical heart and paint it with sweet poison, spreading beautiful darkness through my empty veins." Over time, Chana ended the relationship with her former lover, feeling that they had grown cold and distant from each other. It is known that in prison the woman behaves exemplarily, teaching her fellow inmates art and theology. Collectors fascinated by the lives of humanity's worst, maniacs, offenders, cannibals, have paid large sums for a photograph of the woman with her autograph, as well as a print of her hand. Remarkably, Martins also developed his own fan club. For a long time, police monitored his followers to prevent them from emulating his actions. The convicted man continued treatment and completed his education through correspondence courses. Thus, a good-natured young man became the victim of a terrible scheme by two mentally unstable individuals. Driven by their own desires, lacking restraining mechanisms and societal norms, the perpetrators decided they had the right to take another person's life. Yet what is also monstrous in this story is how many troubled individuals there are among us. Sometimes behind an innocent facade lies sheer hell. New acquaintances do not always positively affect our lives. Sometimes they can mark a point of no return.
Every parent, in an attempt to protect and keep their child safe, tries to explain that trusting strangers can be dangerous. They emphasize that you shouldn't talk to strangers, follow them somewhere, and under no circumstances should you ever get into a stranger's car. Having these conversations is crucial, just like explaining the reasons behind these precautions and the potential consequences of ignoring them. The story of an American high school student named Abigail Hernandez serves as a powerful lesson, illustrating what can happen when you're careless and too trusting of a stranger who, at first glance, seems to offer a helping hand during a tough situation. All Abigail did was hope that a kind guy would give her a ride home, but instead, she ended up in the lair of a real monster. Abigail Hernandez, family and early life. Abigail, or simply Abby. Maria Hernandez was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, along the banks of the Merrimack River. She was the youngest of two daughters born to Ruben and Xenia Hernandez, and grew up with her older sister Sarah, to whom she was very close. Abby's mom worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her dad was a sales agent. Overall, the Hernandez family was strong, happy, and pretty well off. But when Abby was in middle school, her parents decided to separate. Not long after the divorce, her father remarried and started a new family, while the daughters from his first marriage continued to live with their mom. Ruben still supported his older children financially, but their relationship dwindled to little more than birthday and Christmas greetings. From a young age, Abby was an active, curious, and social child. She always had a ton of friends, and she constantly shifted between different hobbies and activities, eager to try everything and be everywhere. Abby played sports, was a talented artist, enjoyed photography, read a lot, and studied foreign languages, which she picked up effortlessly. Around the age of 12, Abby became a member of a local outdoor club, regularly going on camping trips, hiking, and falling in love with the mountains. She also became pretty skilled in wilderness survival, putting those lessons to good use on various adventures. It's not surprising, considering New Hampshire's natural beauty, with its forests, mountains, and rivers. It's a paradise for outdoor activities, hiking, and climbing. This is a state that attracts adventurers, thrill seekers, and nature lovers from all over the country. Abigail Hernandez's classmates described her as a brave, smart, friendly, and determined girl who could easily connect with people around her. She was the kind of person who could jump into a conversation about pretty much any topic, wasn't afraid of challenges, and always spread her optimism to everyone around her. Abby wasn't one to sit still. She was always on the go, constantly moving, and making big plans for her future. The summer of 2013 was packed with exciting events for Abigail. When she returned to school in September, she was full of stories about her summer vacation, where she'd been, what she'd seen, and all the things she'd managed to do. By this time, the 14-year-old had started a romantic relationship with a boy named Jimmy, who went to the same school and was a year older than her. Xenia, Abby's mom, knew about the relationship and didn't mind her daughter dating him. Vanished on her way home from school. In early October 2013, with fall break and her 15th birthday just around the corner, Abigail was busy planning a hiking trip with other members of her outdoor club. She'd even received a pair of brand new hiking boots as a gift, but they were a little tight, so she decided to break them in by wearing them to school. On October 9th, Abby went to school like any other day. After classes, she planned to take a stroll through a nearby park, but promised her mom she wouldn't be out too late. However, by around 5 p.m., when Abby still hadn't come home, Xenia decided to call her, only to find that Abby's phone was turned off. Worried but trying to stay calm, Xenia figured her daughter had probably met up with friends and maybe her phone had died. A couple of hours later, with no word from Abby and unable to reach her, Xenia started to panic. She began calling Abby's friends and teachers, trying to find out when she had left school and where she might have gone. The school informed her that Abby had left right after classes ended and had said goodbye to her friends at the bus stop, where they all got on the school bus. Abby, however, had chosen to walk home. None of Abby's friends had seen her since. She hadn't stopped by anyone's house, and she hadn't called anyone. Even Jimmy couldn't get in touch with her, despite them having plans to meet up later that day. Terrified, Xenia, along with her older daughter Sarah, didn't waste any time and headed straight to the police station to report Abby's disappearance. Since Abby was a minor, the search for her began immediately. Investigators discovered that the last signal from her cell phone was picked up about a mile from her home. Almost immediately, news about the missing high school student started spreading across social media. Flyers with Abby's photo, a description of the clothes she was wearing, and a contact number for any tips about her whereabouts were quickly printed and distributed.
By the next morning, a story about the missing girl was aired during the 7 a.m. news, urging anyone with information to come forward. Hundreds of police officers, volunteers, and concerned citizens joined the search for the 14-year-old. They scoured local parks, empty lots, wooded areas, bodies of water, and abandoned buildings. Law enforcement explored various leads, searched for possible witnesses, and interviewed Abby's friends and family, but every effort turned up empty. The first suspect. Detectives investigating the case tried to find out if Abby had any enemies, grudges, or perhaps an overly persistent admirer, but everyone who knew Abby insisted that she was always the life of the party, a friendly, open, and kind-hearted girl who didn't have any adversaries. She never got into conflicts, and none of her friends had ever heard of anyone stalking or harassing her. One of the first people detectives interviewed was Abigail's boyfriend, Jimmy, who quickly became the prime suspect. They questioned him about whether there had been any disagreements or arguments between them, whether he had any reason to be upset with her, or if he might have had any motive to harm her. But Jimmy seemed stunned by the questions, baffled as to why he was under suspicion, and couldn't fathom how anyone could think he would want to hurt his girlfriend. Jimmy had a rock-solid alibi for the time Abby went missing, which was backed up not just by his family but also by his teachers and about a dozen friends. That day, his schedule was packed. School, sports practice, rehearsals for an upcoming performance with his school band, and his grandfather's birthday party, all of which he attended without missing a beat. Jimmy fully cooperated with the investigation, telling police everything he knew, but it didn't help move the case forward. It was as if Abby had vanished into thin air. Despite months of searching, there wasn't a single clue or even a hint about where to look next. Detectives understood that the chances of finding the teenager alive were dwindling, but Abby's family refused to give up hope. The mysterious letter and a surprising theory. About a month and a half after Abigail's disappearance, her mother found a strange letter from her missing daughter in the mailbox at their home. In the letter, Abby asked for forgiveness for what she had done, said that she was okay, healthy, and safe. She wrote that she loved her mom and Sarah but couldn't reveal where she was. At the end of the message, there was a cryptic and rather puzzling phrase, "Dreams come true." Handwriting analysis confirmed that the letter was indeed written by Abby, and it was dated to early November, which meant there was a high likelihood that the teenager was still alive. But where could she be? And why couldn't she explain the real reason for her disappearance? Was she scared? Or had someone forced her to write that letter? Immediately, a theory emerged, suggesting that Abigail had voluntarily run away from home, but saw the news story about herself and decided to let her family know she was alive. There was speculation that Abby might have been pregnant and had run off with the baby's father, afraid of facing her family's anger and the judgment of others. However, the Hernandez family was outraged by this pregnancy and runaway theory. Sarah firmly stated that if her younger sister had been expecting a baby, she would have been the first to know, as they were always very close and had no secrets from each other. Besides, Abby's only boyfriend was Jimmy, and according to him, they hadn't even been intimate yet. They were both still virgins. Abby's friends backed this up, confirming that she hadn't dated anyone other than Jimmy, and had never mentioned having any other crushes or relationships. Her best friend Miranda was also adamant that Abby couldn't have been pregnant and would never have run away, causing so much pain to her mom and older sister. Plus, all of Abby's documents, personal savings, and valuable belongings were still at home. Investigators thoroughly examined and analyzed the letter, hoping to find any clues or hints about where to look for the girl. Unfortunately, there were no hidden messages or cries for help. Despite this, the FBI got involved in the case, classifying it as an abduction. They believed Abby was being held against her will, and that the letter had been written under strict orders, with no chance to reveal her location. It turned out to be an accurate assumption, as the kidnapper and his victim were just a few dozen miles away from the Hernandez home. What's even more disturbing is that police had visited the kidnapper's house multiple times since Abby's disappearance, but found nothing suspicious.
Meanwhile, the man himself felt tracked and frantically thought about what to do with his captive. Who is Nathaniel Kibby? Now it's time to introduce the kidnapper himself. Nathaniel, or just Nate. Kibby was born on July 15, 1980, in the same town as Abby. There isn't much reliable information about his family, but some sources suggest that he was raised by his mom alone and never knew his biological father. In his school years, Nate was a real troublemaker, a bully, and that one kid everyone was scared of. He constantly got into fights and clashed with those around him. Even more unsettling, he kept a list of people he disliked, people he planned to beat up or harm in some way. From a young age, he displayed aggression and cruelty toward others, making his peers avoid him while teachers struggled to handle his behavior. As a teenager, young Kibby caught the attention of the police several times for different offenses. He was part of a gang, which he took great pride in, had a fascination with firearms, and knew a lot about them. He had multiple run-ins with the law for assault causing serious injuries, illegal possession of substances, and petty theft, but he always got off with just a slap on the wrist. Interestingly, Nate had attended the same high school as Abby, but since he was 18 years older than her, they never crossed paths, either in or outside of school. After finishing high school, it seemed like Nathaniel decided to turn his life around and leave his criminal activities behind. He got a job at a local business where, in general, his co-workers and management were generally positive about him. But a couple of years later, after a serious conflict, Nate quit, moved to the suburbs, and settled in a trailer park in a far from prosperous neighborhood. Neighbors thought he was strange and tried not to get involved with this irascible and aggressive guy. In 2011, Kibby, who by then was already in his 30s, met and actually cohabited with a young girl. She was from a dysfunctional family, ran away from home, and moved into the adult man's trailer. Remarkably, he didn't even try to hide their close relationship and introduced her as his girlfriend. He got away with all of this and was not punished in any way. In the spring of 2013, Nate attempted kidnapping for the first time, but he luckily failed. He attacked a 15-year-old schoolgirl right at a bus stop near the school and tried to force her into his car. However, she put up fierce resistance, began to break free and call for help. Passers-by ran to the screams, and the attacker promptly left the scene. Surprisingly, despite the testimony of the victim and witnesses, the case was quickly closed, and it never went to trial. For some reason, no one thought this guy could pose a real threat. A kind stranger. Now let's go back to the day Abigail disappeared, October 9th, 2013. As already mentioned, on the eve of her 15th birthday, the girl received a gift of hiking boots that were a little too tight for her. She decided to wear the shoes a little before hiking in the mountains and wore them to school. Toward the end of class, Hernandez realized her mistake, but didn't give up and walked home. It was getting harder and harder to walk, and each step was painful, but there was still a long way to go home. Suddenly, an old pickup truck, driven by Nathaniel, pulled up beside her. The smiling young man offered her a ride to wherever she wanted to go, but she refused. Nevertheless, the stranger did not give up and continued to roll slowly beside the potential future victim. Nate noticed that Abby was limping a bit and asked her what had happened. Abby sighed and admitted that her new boots were too tight and had given her a blister. Hearing this, the man simply swung open the passenger door and gestured for her to hop in. After hesitating for a moment, Hernandez accepted the offer. She assumed that this kind, smiling man couldn't possibly be dangerous, but she was terribly wrong. On the way, Kibby started making small talk, trying to put his victim at ease, and he did a pretty good job of it. Abby felt safe, answering his questions and even laughing at his jokes. At one point, the man mentioned that he needed to stop by a hardware store to pick up a few things for a repair job. As they pulled into a dark parking lot, Abigail grew visibly nervous. She told him that her house wasn't far from there and that she could walk the rest of the way. Catching the unsettling look in the driver's eyes, she tried to unbuckle her seatbelt and jump out of the car, but Nate had anticipated her move. In one swift motion, he grabbed her by the clothes with one hand and pulled a gun out of the glove compartment with the other. He pointed it directly at Abby's face and threatened to kill her if she tried to resist. The attacker then tied her hands and feet with zip ties and put a baseball cap on her head in a way that blocked her view, making sure she couldn't see where they were going. But soon, he noticed that Abby had shifted the cap to try to see the road. This infuriated him. He pulled out a stun gun and shocked her until she lost consciousness. Imprisoned by a deranged sadist. Abby woke up in a strange, cramped, and stifling space with no windows. To give you a clearer picture, it was actually a small shipping container owned by Nathaniel, hidden away in the trailer park, tucked behind some trees. Soon after, the kidnapper appeared with duct tape and a motorcycle helmet in his hands. He taped her mouth and eyes shut, put the helmet on her head, and after making sure she was completely immobilized and helpless, he tore off her clothes and assaulted her. From that moment on, he repeatedly forced himself on her, almost every day, turning his twisted fantasies into reality. Nate also used psychological abuse on his captive, threatening to hurt her family if she ever tried to escape or call for help. At the same time, he promised that he'd let her go if she behaved and didn't cause him any trouble. During the first few days of her captivity, Abigail was in a state of shock, practically saying goodbye to her life. But as time passed, she realized that her captor wasn't planning to kill her, at least not yet. She decided to try to connect with him emotionally and see if she could convince him to let her go. She told him that she didn't judge him, that everyone makes mistakes, and that she wouldn't go to the police if he just released her back to her family. However, Nate was unpredictable. The smallest thing or word could set him off, turning him into a monster. Sometimes he would show her a twisted kind of tenderness, but more often he was brutal, using all forms of emotional and physical abuse against her. The container where he kept Abby was well soundproofed, so no one outside could hear her screams. But after about a month, he started bringing her into his trailer, allowing her to take a shower and even watch TV with him. Through the news, they learned about the extensive search efforts for Abby. That's when Kibby got the idea to have her write a letter to her mother to convince her that Abby was okay and to try to stop the search operation. Abigail wrote several letters under her kidnapper's dictation, and each time, she tried to leave a hint about where to find her. But Nate saw through it and punished her severely. Eventually, she followed his instructions to avoid provoking his anger further. The mystery of the name. About 6 months later, Nate started trusting his captive enough to let her help him with his counterfeit money operation. Sometimes he let her sleep in his trailer and even trusted her to cook meals, but he remained as brutal as ever, continuing to abuse Abby. He forced her to call him master and kept his real name a secret. Gradually, the obedient captive managed to build some rapport with her captor, and he even agreed to bring her books and magazines. One day, on one of the pages, Abby saw the name Nathaniel Kibby, but she wasn't sure if that was really her kidnapper's name. So she decided to take a dangerous gamble. One day she simply called him by the name, waiting for any kind of reaction. But all he did was roll his eyes, sigh, and calmly ask how she had learned his name. Abigail admitted that she had seen it in one of the books. He smirked but said nothing. Help was closer than she knew. Since Abby spent most of her time in the soundproof container, she had no idea what was happening outside. She didn't know that at one point the police had been just a few feet away from her, but they were there for a completely unrelated reason. You see, Nate had once again broken the law, and in an attempt to avoid serious trouble, he decided to cooperate with law enforcement and confessed to illegally possessing a firearm. The police showed up with a search warrant, thoroughly inspecting his trailer, but they didn't even think to check the container. For some reason, no one considered taking a look inside. Thanks to his cooperation, Kibby only received a fine, and his weapon was confiscated. Astonishingly, after all the terrible things he'd done, he still didn't face any real consequences. It seemed luck was on his side, and he probably felt invincible. He had no intention of letting Abby go, but maybe she had become just another part of his routine. A new girlfriend and a miracle escape. In July 2014, Nathaniel met a woman named Lorraine at a bar. After a brief conversation, he took her back to his trailer where they became intimate. Later, Lorraine started complaining about her financial struggles,
mentioning that she didn't even have enough money to pay her rent. As she was leaving, Nate handed her two $50 bills, and she left. The next day, a furious Lorraine called Kibby, telling him that the money he'd given her was fake. She screamed that she'd already informed the police about where she got the counterfeit bills and warned him that law enforcement would be showing up with another search warrant soon. What she didn't realize was that her call would change the life of the missing high school girl forever. On July 20th, the kidnapper unexpectedly gave Abby all her personal belongings, tied her hands, sat her in the passenger seat of his car, and covered her face with a baseball cap. Abby had no idea what was happening and feared that he was finally going to kill her. But then Nate stopped on a deserted country road, freed Abby, and simply told her, "Get out, and don't you dare go to the police." After she stepped out of the car, he floored the gas pedal and sped off. Abby couldn't believe what was happening. She walked along the road in a daze until she saw a sign and realized that home wasn't far away. It took her a couple of hours to make the journey. In later interviews, she recalled constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid that her kidnapper might come back, but he was nowhere to be seen. Coming home. The Hernandez family had a surveillance camera at their front door that captured the moment Abby walked in. Abby heard her mom talking to someone on the phone and called out loudly to her. In shock, her mother dropped the phone and ran to the door. They hugged each other tightly, crying for a long time, unable to believe that the nightmare was finally over and they were together again. Abby noticed how much her mother's appearance had changed. She looked older and worn out from the months of worry. Xenia immediately started asking her daughter where she had been all this time and what had happened, suggesting they go straight to the police. But remembering her captor's threats, Abby decided not to turn him in and lied, saying she didn't know who had taken her or where she had been held. Even at the police station, she refused to reveal his name, afraid that Nate would come after her and her family. Over the next week, Abby wrestled with her thoughts, not sure what to do. Eventually, she decided to tell her mom the truth. Xenia convinced her to go back to the police, arguing that the man who did this needed to be brought to justice. Besides, neither Abby nor her family could truly feel safe while Kibby was still out there. Arrest, trial, and sentencing. On July 27, 2014, Abigail finally gave the police her kidnapper's name, along with the make and license plate of his car. Nate Kibby was arrested the very next day, and to everyone's surprise, he didn't put up any resistance, even though he completely denied being guilty. However, when authorities searched his trailer and the container, which they finally checked, they found overwhelming evidence proving that Abby had been held there for months, enduring abuse and suffering. Investigators discovered her hair, blood, sweat, and even broken fingernails. Despite the fact that Nate's guilt was beyond doubt, his lawyer filed a motion in August to have him released on bail. Shockingly, the judge approved this request, causing public outrage and disbelief. But on the same day, an order was issued prohibiting Kibby from approaching or contacting any members of the Hernandez family. The trial against Nathaniel Kibby began in December 2014 and continued until May 2016. In an attempt to get a lighter sentence, the defendant agreed to a plea deal and admitted his guilt. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 90 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no sooner than after 45 years. Abigail spoke in court, saying that she forgave her captor and added that because of him, she learned to appreciate her life and every moment spent with her loved ones even more. Her mother also took the stand, stating that while she hated Kibby with all her heart, she was still grateful that he had spared her daughter's life and allowed her to come home. Breaking off relationships almost always leaves emotional scars and turmoil which do not heal quickly. People handle such situations differently. Some prefer to never see or speak to each other again to avoid reopening fresh wounds, while others remain friends. However, there are instances where ex-lovers are no longer together, but also unable to completely separate due to something shared that cannot be quickly dissolved. In situations where former lovers start new relationships in each other's presence and continue to interact, it can lead to unpredictable outcomes. The story of Iliko a successful entrepreneur and owner of a high-end spa salon in California, resembled a fairy tale but ended abruptly and tragically. Initially, there were suggestions of an accident, an attack, or rival machinations, but the truth turned out to be far grimmer. A devastating event befell the successful and attractive woman at the hands of someone she once loved and trusted immensely. Who is Iliko Krajniak? Childhood, early years. A girl named Iliko Krajniak was born on June 8, 1969, in the city of Miskolc in northeastern Hungary, and was the younger of two children in a middle-class family. Her mother, Juliana, worked as a nurse in the Department of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, but later, in the 1980s, retrained in aesthetic medicine, which was becoming increasingly popular, and opened her own clinic. The family patriarch, Laszlo Krajniak, was a simple worker and spent most of his life laboring at a local factory, striving to provide for his family. Ildiko's elder brother, named after their father, was only a few years older than her. From early childhood, the siblings got along well and were nearly inseparable. Following in their father's footsteps, her brother gained an engineering degree and worked at the same machine-building plant for a while before starting his own small business in their hometown. Iliko was naturally creative and imaginative from childhood, feeling constrained not only in Miskolc, but also in conservative Hungary. She dreamed of traveling the world, seeing other cities and countries, establishing her business, achieving success and recognition, and breaking free from the ordinariness in which her family lived. After finishing school, young Krajniak enrolled in a medical college and later obtained a license to work in aesthetic cosmetology. Inspired by her mother's example, she aimed to achieve more and become a true star in her field. Her first success came when she was just 20 years old. The budding specialist skillfully built her career, independently developing a business plan and strategy. She quickly built up a client base and started earning decent money by her city's standards. Iliko constantly strived to learn and improve her skills, staying up to date with all the latest innovations in cosmetology, aesthetic medicine, and the beauty industry at large. However, she understood that her opportunities at home were limited and that, as a specialist, she would soon reach their ceiling. To move forward, she would need to find a place that offered more chances to fully realize her potential. After earning a bachelor's degree in medical aesthetics, the ambitious young Krajniak decided to take action. Moving to the USA, the ambitions of this young woman were enviable, though few believed she would truly embark on such radical changes, as Iliko was very close to her family and seemed unlikely to ever leave her parents. However, in the summer of 1992, shortly after celebrating her 23rd birthday, Iliko decided to realize her lifelong dream and moved across the ocean to the United States of America. Chasing the American dream, the determined Hungarian gambled everything and took the risk. It was not just a move, but a desire to completely change her life. She gathered all the money she had saved, bought a one-way plane ticket, and set off for another continent. There, she had no relatives, no friends, nor acquaintances. Nobody was waiting for her, and she barely knew any English. But she took that step into the unknown. Her parents had mixed feelings about their daughter's decision, but no one tried to stop her since she was already an adult and could make such serious decisions independently. Nevertheless, her relatives were very concerned about how her life would unfold in a foreign land. Iliko decided to head straight to sunny California, where she planned to look for a job, learn the language, and, so to speak, put down roots. The move was a real culture shock for her. After living in conservative, prim, and cold Hungary, America indeed seemed like a fairy tale, and a place where all dreams come true. Initially, the young woman stayed in a budget hostel, trying to save money since she still had to find a job, which was not easy without knowing the language. However, luck soon smiled on her, and she was hired as an assistant to a master stylist in one of the local beauty salons. The salary allowed her to rent a decent apartment and provide for her basic needs, but to work in the field of cosmetology and aesthetic medicine, Krajniak needed to master the language well and obtain the appropriate medical license in the U.S. With no connections or acquaintances, Iliko could only rely on her own strength. She worked diligently,
dedicating all her free time to learning English and improving her communication skills. Her perseverance and hard work soon paid off. She successfully passed the required exams and obtained a license allowing her to work in cosmetology, leading specialist. Just a couple of years after moving, Iliko became the leading specialist at a spa center in an elite 5-star hotel frequented by show business stars and other celebrities. She earned a reputation as the best cosmetologist in town, with bookings made months in advance. Additionally, as a professional, she constantly educated herself and advanced her qualifications. She attended international exhibitions and seminars, had an excellent understanding of the compositions of cosmetic products and treatments, and easily helped clients resolve almost any aesthetic skin issues. Beyond her professional skills, the young woman possessed superb diplomatic qualities. She easily and effortlessly made useful contacts and influential friends, quickly established relationships with business partners, and had a natural business acumen. Krajniak was not content to always work for others, and dreamed of opening her own salon, which would be the best not only in the city, but throughout the state of California. By the mid-90s, the young Hungarian had become the most sought-after specialist at the center where she worked. Clients who had once visited her for treatment subsequently tried to book appointments only with this cosmetologist. Iliko already understood that the client base she had built would stay with her, even if she changed her place of work. The management of the spa complex knew this too, and therefore did everything possible to retain the specialist by creating the most favorable working conditions. Family life. Krajniak was open, friendly, sociable, and very beautiful, naturally attracting a lot of male attention and having many admirers. However, during her first years in the United States, she was more focused on learning the language, professional growth, and career advancement, pushing her personal life to not just a back burner, but perhaps to the 5th priority. In 1995, she met a young man named Ramilo Vestal who had Asian roots and had immigrated to America with his family as a schoolboy. He had pursued a medical education and was working as a doctor at a local hospital. The couple quickly found a common language, and romantic feelings developed between them. A year after meeting in the spring of 1996, they had a modest wedding attended only by their closest people. 2 years later, the couple welcomed their only child together, a son they named Keanu. The new parents adored their child, spending all their free time with family. Their home was filled with love and understanding, and everyone who knew them noted how harmoniously they complemented each other and how they radiated happiness when together. In the mid-90s, Iliko convinced her cousin to also move to the United States, and she decided to relocate with her husband and children. The relatives settled near her home. They communicated closely, regularly visited each other, and their families became close friends. In 2000, after a long illness, Krajniak's father passed away, which was a severe blow to the family. By that time, her elder brother Laszlo was already married, raising children, and living in another city, leaving their mother Juliana alone in the family home, suffering from severe depression. Additionally, she began showing signs of dementia, making it unsafe to leave her alone. Iliko decided to bring her mother to California so that the elderly woman wouldn't feel lonely and could spend her final years surrounded by family. For Juliana, moving to America was also a challenging step, but her daughter helped her adapt, surrounding her with love and care. Moreover, the grandmother was overjoyed to have the chance to dote on her grandson Keanu, whom she had previously only seen in photographs. Own business. In 2002, Krajniak finally decided to open her own salon. By then, she had accumulated enough funds, gained business experience, and built an extensive client base. Supported by her loved ones, the young woman dared to risk everything. Iliko established her spa salon in Aliso Viejo, California, located in the San Joaquin Hills of southern Orange County. She named it Magyar Kozmetika, which translates to Hungarian cosmetics. Soon, her establishment earned a 5-star rating, and its fame spread throughout the state. In her work, Iliko used only premium quality cosmetics, treatments, and equipment. She earned a reputation as one of the best cosmetologists, and she took great pride in this. The woman skillfully managed and developed her business, and she had chosen an excellent location for her salon. Her establishment was located in a major business center in Southern California, 10 miles from the popular Laguna Beach and about 70 miles from Los Angeles. For many years, the cosmetologist successfully developed her business, with her income steadily increasing. By the late 2000s, she and her husband had bought a luxurious large house where they moved with their son and Krajniak's mother. The woman had her own driver and household assistants, could afford anything she desired, and lived the life she had always dreamed of. Moreover, it is worth noting that Iliko herself was a living advertisement for her salon. She always looked stunning and seemed not to age at all. She also continuously enhanced her qualifications, obtained an international medical certificate, and could practice in virtually any country. Over time, the cosmetologist also began to conduct training seminars and courses for professionals in the field. For many years, Krajniak engaged in her beloved work, striving to be the best. She developed business strategies, researched the market to stay competitive, found reliable suppliers, and devised advertising campaigns. And all this did not prevent her from continuing to personally see clients who sought her services specifically. For her only beloved child, the woman paid for education in an elite private school, music lessons with the best teachers, and language courses. From her experience, she knew how important it was to master several foreign languages and how useful this could be in life. In 2016, Keanu became a student at a prestigious university and went to study in Washington. Crisis and the last vacation. The year 2017 started off as an exceptionally tough one for Iliko. The business center, which had housed her spa salon for over 15 years, suddenly changed ownership. The new owner quickly made it clear that he had his own plans for the building in a prestigious area, and thus the leases with the tenants were swiftly terminated. Iliko was not prepared for such a turn of events and had to immediately look for a new location to relocate. For Krajniak, the situation was a major stressor. She faced colossal losses and tried to find a suitable place close to the old one. She stayed in Aliso Viejo but moved from the luxurious business center to a 2-story commercial building, occupying half of the first floor. The move itself also amounted to a significant expense, as it involved transporting a large amount of expensive equipment that required careful handling. Additionally, the new location needed some cosmetic repairs before it could be operational. In March 2018, when the main work was completed and the spa salon reopened at the new location, a work-weary and stressed Iliko decided to take a small vacation. She flew to Portugal for 2 weeks, relaxing under the warm sun at a popular beach resort. It seemed that the difficulties were behind her, and she was quick to make up for lost time. A month later, Laszlo flew to California to visit his sister and elderly mother. They communicated well, spent quality time together, and even took a family trip to Washington to surprise Keanu at university. On May 5th, Iliko and her brother flew to their native Hungary. The man was returning home to his family, while for Iliko, it was a business trip which he decided to combine with a visit to relatives she had not seen in a long time. She returned home with innovative treatments that provided stunning, rejuvenating effects, eager to put them to use. Unfortunately, less than a week later, the salon into which she had poured her soul was destroyed, and she herself was found dead. Accident, attack, or planned crime. On May 15, 2018, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the emergency services received consecutive reports of a powerful explosion and fire in the commercial center housing Iliko's spa salon. The blast was heard several blocks away, and frightened people speculated that it could have been an attack, fearing it might be the first in a series. Across the street from the destroyed building was a daycare, and parents, upon hearing what had happened, rushed there to ensure their children were safe. Fire trucks, ambulances, and several police patrols were immediately dispatched to the scene. The building itself was partially destroyed. Flames engulfed the interior, and the street was littered with debris from bricks, glass shards, and roofing fragments. At that time, it was unclear how many people were inside at the time of the explosion and whether there were any fatalities or injuries. Witnesses reported a loud bang and acrid smoke that quickly spread through the street,
triggering car alarms in the vicinity. As rescuers moved closer to the epicenter of the explosion, the scene became increasingly horrific. Blood was everywhere inside, and under the debris and broken furniture, 2 injured people were found. Later, it was discovered they were a mother and daughter who had come for treatments at the spa on that fateful day. The women were concussed, lacerated by shards, and had severe burns. They were knocked unconscious by the blast wave, but fortunately both were saved. Several other employees and clients sustained minor injuries and smoke inhalation and were taken to the hospital. But the most gruesome discovery awaited the rescuers. Behind the former reception desk, they found disfigured and severely burned human remains. Identification was not immediately possible, but it was soon confirmed to be the 48-year-old spa owner, Iliko Krajniak, who was at the epicenter. Bomb disposal units were at the scene, as there was no certainty that another explosion would not occur. From the beginning, it was difficult to determine what exactly caused such a destructive blast and what had detonated. The initial theory of a gas leak and electrical short was quickly dismissed, as there was a specific point of explosion. The possibility of a terrorist act was investigated, though no other explosive devices were found in this or neighboring buildings. Another very plausible theory was that of a carefully planned crime against Iliko. The deceased was a kind and open person, engaged in charity work, and always willing to help others. However, she was also a successful entrepreneur with many envious rivals and competitors who might have wanted to eliminate her radically. Each theory had to be checked, but first, it was necessary to speak with the victim's relatives and friends, as well as interview the surviving witnesses. At the same time, an emergency call came from a woman named Lori Stone, who could not reach her boyfriend, Stephen Bill. According to her, he was a co-founder of the spa salon and might also have been in the building at the time of the explosion. Eyewitness accounts. The surviving mother and daughter suffered serious injuries, were urgently operated on, and were in intensive care. As soon as their condition stabilized slightly, they agreed to speak with law enforcement and recount everything that happened. On that day, the women were undergoing treatments at Krajniak's spa salon. They had been there before, knew the owner well, and everything was as usual during this visit until they went to the reception desk to pay for their cosmetic services. Iliko often performed the duties of the receptionist herself and was at the desk at that moment. She was sorting through mail, and there was also a large package on the desk in front of her. She took the payment, issued the receipts to the clients, and then, continuing the casual conversation, took a box cutter and began to open that very box. At that moment, an unexpected, powerful explosion occurred, and everything after seemed like a blur. According to the daughter, she first saw a blinding flash followed by a deafening bang, then felt a wave of heat and realized she was flying through the air. In reality, she was thrown by the blast wave, but miraculously, she remained conscious, managed to find her mother amid the chaos, and dragged her to a destroyed wall for air, after which she lost consciousness and later woke up in the hospital. After speaking with the victims, there was no doubt that this was a premeditated crime, and the explosive device had been disguised as an ordinary package. The next steps were to identify a circle of suspects and determine who might not only wish the woman dead, but also carry it through. It was also unclear whether the target was solely Iliko, or if her 59-year-old business partner Stephen Bill was also in mortal danger. Police were immediately dispatched to the man's home. Bill had just returned from a business trip and was greeted by a pile of packages at his doorstep. He was moved to a safe distance, and bomb disposal experts checked each box, but they only contained store orders, and no explosives were found. Stephen was questioned, but he appeared shocked by the news of Krajniak's death and could not name anyone who might wish her harm. No longer spouses, just neighbors. The deceased's husband, Ramilo Vestil, arrived at the scene as soon as he heard about the incident. He had hoped until the last moment that his wife might have survived, but upon hearing the tragic news, he was utterly devastated. However, it was also necessary to question him. At this point, a very curious detail emerged that only a few members of the Krajniak family knew.
It turned out that Iliko and Ramilo had long ceased to be a couple in the conventional sense. They continued to live in their shared, large, and luxurious house, had not formalized a divorce, and maintained a warm relationship. But in fact, they had become just neighbors to each other. In recent years, each had their own personal life. They did not feel jealousy towards one another and were ready to let go completely if either of them found true love. This circumstance seemed strange and very suspicious to the police. In the event of his wife's death, Ramilo, still being her legal spouse, would inherit the house, all the property, and the quite profitable business. However, this last aspect argued rather in favor of the man's innocence. Why would he destroy the spa salon, which was the main source of income for their family? Business partner and former lover. It was established that over the past couple of years, the deceased had been involved with at least 5 different men. Most of these were fleeting interests, but 2 names particularly drew the investigators' attention. A close friend of Krajniak revealed that the woman had been seeing a man named Nicholas for a few months, to whom she felt strong emotions, and did not rule out the possibility that their relationship could progress to a new level, even potentially leading to marriage. A week before the tragedy, the couple spent a weekend together in Sacramento, where they flew spontaneously, dropping all other engagements. Detectives quickly located this man and interrogated him, but he was found to have no involvement in the tragedy and was as shocked by the events as anyone else, with no motive to harm the woman he loved. It then emerged that several months earlier, Iliko had been closely involved with her business partner, Stephen Bill. When investigators looked into how they met and why they became partners, despite Bill having no previous ties to the beauty industry, a quite intriguing story surfaced. About 1.5 years ago, when the woman faced serious business problems, was looking for a new location for the salon, and was experiencing significant losses, she met Stephen. He was charmed by her beauty, fell in love at first sight, and agreed to cover all the expenses associated with moving the spa center. He also invested a substantial sum into its development, becoming Krajniak's business partner. At the same time, they began a romantic relationship that lasted about 6 months. It is likely that the woman reciprocated out of gratitude, but she did not truly have deep feelings for Bill. In March 2018, they vacationed together in Portugal. But by that time, Iliko had already started an affair with Nicholas and was constantly in touch with him by phone, which irritated Stephen. She broke up with him immediately upon returning. The former lovers continued to run the business together, and Bill did not give up trying to win her back, but she was already happy in her new relationship. He even tried to make her jealous by starting a relationship with Laurie Stone, but Krajniak was unaffected by this. She no longer cared. It is likely that Bill harbored resentment towards her and could have sought revenge. Strange hobby and skeletons in the closet. The police decided to take a closer look at Stephen and discovered that he had a rather specific hobby. He was involved in making fireworks and was well versed in pyrotechnics. The man did not deny this and did not obstruct the search of his home. There, officers found professional equipment, materials for creating decorative fireworks and rockets, as well as gunpowder and other combustible chemicals. At that time, the police had no solid reason or evidence to detain Bill, and he was released. However, they decided to investigate his background further and discovered that his wife had died under strange circumstances 10 years ago. Officially, the cause of death was pancreatitis, but it was preceded by a mysterious accident at home while they were moving furniture. It appeared that Stephen had provoked the incident, but nothing could be proven. Furthermore, he received a substantial insurance payout after becoming a widower, which also suggested a motive for murder. Arrest and trial. Several months later, detectives managed to find video surveillance footage from May 10th, showing Bill purchasing a mix of combustible chemical components and parts for making poppers, which were later found at the explosion site. Additionally, it was revealed that early on the morning of the tragedy, he visited the spa salon to leave the deadly package. He entered through the back door using his key and parked his car on a nearby street to remain unnoticed. On March 3, 2019, Stephen Bill was arrested on charges of premeditated murder, use of a weapon of mass destruction, and intentional destruction of a building. During the trial, several more charges were added, related to causing serious bodily harm. One of the women injured in the explosion lost an eye, while another suffered deep burns to her face and body. Although Bill pleaded not guilty, the evidence and testimonies collected were not in his favor. Moreover, witnesses said he had never reconciled with the fact that Iliko had left him and he had begun to stalk her. Shortly before her death, the woman had confided to friends that she feared for her life and was concerned that her ex-lover might seek revenge. Only in early 2024 was Stephen Bill finally found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. All appeals submitted by him and his team of lawyers were rejected. Sometimes one person's life can trigger a chain of irreversible events that end up destroying entire families. The line between sorrow and hatred is often so thin that once you cross it, there's no going back. In a small village, when the quiet hides a storm of human emotions, unseen threads of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge can tie people up, pushing them to act in the dark. This story is about how intense emotions can tear apart not only lives, but even the closest relationships. The question is, who's ready to pay the price for unbearable grief, and what will it cost those left behind? The cry of a baby shattered the silence of the night as a man, drenched in sweat from fear, rushed up to the second floor of his house. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but his heart was pounding. In the bedroom, he was met with a horrifying scene. His wife, Maiva, was lying face down on the floor, covered in blood. Next to her, under her arm, was their son, crying uncontrollably. The man was frozen with terror and confusion. What could have happened? Just a few hours earlier, everything seemed normal. His shift at the restaurant had ended late. It was a wedding party, and he'd already told his wife he'd be home later than usual. They had been texting back and forth all evening, but around midnight, Maiva's messages stopped. He figured she had just fallen asleep, exhausted. There was nothing to worry about. The house was quiet when he got home at 12:49 a.m., and although the door was unlocked, he didn't think much of it. The only unusual thing was the silence and the TV being off. And now, standing in front of this terrifying scene, he couldn't make sense of it. Maybe she had fallen and hurt herself? He dialed 911, unsure of what to do. The operator gave him instructions on how to perform CPR, and he started giving his wife chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth. But as he worked, it slowly dawned on him that she was already gone. The paramedics arrived around 3 a.m. and officially declared her dead. Their son was unharmed, but what exactly caused Maiva's death was still a mystery. The investigators who arrived at the young family's home couldn't have predicted the grim reality of what had happened. Blood spattered across the walls, and even the ceiling pointed to a brutal struggle, but they quickly realized this wasn't just a typical case of domestic violence or an accidental fall. The woman's skull was almost completely crushed, and her body showed signs of multiple blows. Bruises on her hands and back indicated that she had fought hard to protect herself and her son during the attack. By around 2:48 a.m., emergency responders were already on the scene, but by then, it was clear. This was a cold-blooded murder. The medical examiner later confirmed the brutality of the attack. She had been hit with extreme violence, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. And although at first it seemed like it could have been a robbery, that theory fell apart when Maiva's purse, along with her personal belongings and money, was found the next morning near a pond close to the restaurant. All the evidence pointed to Maiva being the target. The only question left was, who could commit such a vicious crime? The police started digging into the family's past. At first glance, Maiva and her husband Alain seemed to have a peaceful life. They had known each other since childhood, grew up in the same village, and went to the same school. Their life appeared to be full of happiness.
Soon after their wedding, they found out they were expecting a child, and their son Lorenzo was born a year later. The family moved into a small house, and Maiva had plans to open a nail salon. They had even picked out a bigger house for the business, but just 3 weeks before the move, everything changed. Maiva's death was so unexpected that her loved ones couldn't believe it. And even though their life seemed perfect on the surface, the investigation uncovered dark secrets within the family. It turned out that Alain was involved in illegal activities related to drug dealing. He had run-ins with the law, and while Maiva was aware of this, she was strongly against his involvement in anything like that. After Alain's arrest, she even turned down an offer to buy a car for 100,000 euros, earned through his shady operations, saying she didn't want dirty money. Her frustration extended to all of Alain's friends who came by for business deals. Maiva wouldn't let him meet with them, which annoyed some of his acquaintances. Some of these people, including old school friends, weren't happy with Maiva's interference, which led to conflicts. Maiva's relatives believed these connections might have led to her murder. They thought Alain owed someone a large sum of money, and the crime was meant to send a message. However, Alain insisted that no one in his circle would be capable of such a crime. He immediately told the police about all his contacts and business dealings, assuring them he had no outstanding debts or serious conflicts. Moreover, the police quickly ruled out the possibility of a criminal dispute. The house where Maiva was killed was in perfect order. Nothing had been stolen except for that one purse, and as it turned out, nothing had been taken from it either. But the investigation took a new turn. The police discovered that 6 months before the crime, Maiva and her husband had been receiving threats from an elderly couple in a neighboring village. The threats stemmed from a conflict involving Maiva's father's best friend. Investigators started tracking down where this couple was on the night of the murder. The small village was shocked as the horrifying details of the crime came to light. No one could believe that the man who regularly visited Maiva's father and supported him through tough times turned out to be guilty. It all began with 2 witnesses who noticed strange behavior that night, and their testimony was the key to cracking the case. The first witness, a young doctor, was out for a late-night walk with his baby in a stroller when he saw a man wearing pink rubber gloves. The man was clearly trying to avoid being seen, and when he noticed the doctor, he quickly turned away. The doctor remembered his odd behavior and even recalled part of the license plate number from the car he saw nearby. The second witness, who was driving home with his wife, also recognized this man. He reported seeing Rue Berrois slowly driving down the street, carefully looking around. It seemed suspicious, so the man decided to alert the police. The investigators didn't waste any time. They tapped the Berrois family's phone. This move paid off. During one conversation, Rue Berrois' wife, Enda, unintentionally gave her husband away. She was talking to a friend, telling her how that night her husband had come home with Maiva's purse, the same one that went missing on the day of the crime. He showed it to her and coldly said, "See, I did it." The police immediately arrested the couple, and soon after, Rue Berrois confessed. Rue Berrois had lost his son, Rudolph, a few months before, and he couldn't cope with the grief. On that fateful night, he first had dinner at a friend's house and then went to the cemetery to tend to his son's grave. He took the gloves and shoes he usually used for cemetery work. After leaving the grave, he was overcome with rage. He got into his car and drove to Alain and Maiva's house. With a baseball bat that he always kept in his car, he easily got into the house. The door wasn't locked. When Rue went up to the second floor where Maiva and her son were sleeping, Maiva woke up. She recognized him right away, but before she could say or do anything, Rue hit her multiple times with the bat. He later reenacted the entire crime during a police investigation. After the murder, he grabbed Maiva's purse, walked out of the house, and went home. Once there, he showed the purse to his wife and then got rid of it. The next day, he burned the baseball bat in the fireplace,
When the villagers found out that Rue Berrois was the killer, their shock was beyond words. They couldn't believe that the man who had been supporting Maiva's father, asking about the police investigation, and constantly inquiring about any new findings, was the same person who committed the crime. He even asked if they had found her purse or discovered any clues at the crime scene. So why did Berrois commit such a brutal act? It all tied back to his son, Rudolph. 8 months before the murder, on August 21, 2011, Rudolph was in a car accident while speeding toward Alain and Maiva's house to have it out with them. On the way, he lost control of the car, skidded off the road, and died just minutes after the crash. Rue blamed Alain and Maiva for his son's death, and his anger grew by the day. Every morning, Enda Berrois, Rue's wife, would light candles at an altar dedicated to her son. Their house was filled with photos of Rudolph, surrounded by somber symbols of loss, and quiet conversations with his spirit became part of her daily routine. She was convinced that his death wasn't just a tragic accident, and she searched for answers every day. On the night Rudolph died in the crash, something shifted in her mind. Her heart was consumed with hatred and a thirst for revenge. Since then, Enda couldn't stay calm. She didn't believe the official story, nor did she trust the investigators or the forensic experts who said her son had simply lost control of the car. The fact that Rudolph's body was found outside the car and the seatbelt marks didn't match his position in the vehicle made her think that someone else had been driving. Nothing could convince her that Rudolph died by accident. Despite all the forensic reports, including DNA tests and phone records, Enda was certain her son was murdered. She collected evidence, took photos of anything related to the tragedy, and was determined to find the person responsible. Even months after the accident, she made her husband drill a hole into Rudolph's grave, hoping to record his voice with a tape recorder and get answers from the other side. But gradually, her hatred became focused on 2 people, Alain and Maiva. In Enda's mind, she formed a dark theory that they were responsible for her son's death. Her hatred for Maiva grew even stronger as more details about their relationship came to light. Many years ago, when Maiva and Rudolph were teenagers, they dated, and to everyone else, it seemed like a typical teenage romance. But for Maiva, he was her first real love. She was deeply in love with Rudolph in her younger years, but over time, she realized he wasn't the kind of person she could build a life with. His cheating and constant drama ruined their relationship, and by 2009, Maiva decided to end things with him. She found comfort and support in Alain, who soon became her fiancé. However, Rudolph couldn't handle the fact that Maiva had moved on. Even after she got pregnant, he wouldn't leave her alone. Maiva told her mom that one time Rudolph tried to kiss her on a bridge, but she pushed him away. Soon after, Maiva gave birth, but that didn't stop Rudolph. His obsessive behavior continued, and he kept texting her, begging to start over. Seeing that Rudolph wouldn't back off, Alain decided to step in. He met with Rudolph and warned him that he wouldn't tolerate the harassment any longer. But even after that, Rudolph kept sending messages. So Alain took those messages and showed them to Crystal, Rudolph's girlfriend at the time. That ended their relationship. Crystal broke up with Rudolph after finding out he was still obsessed with his ex. This loss pushed Rudolph over the edge. On that fateful night, he got drunk at a bar and, grabbing a hammer, decided to drive over to Alain's house. He was determined to confront him. People at the bar saw him and felt like something bad was about to happen. When police cars and ambulances sped by shortly after, many already guessed what had gone down. Rudolph never made it to Alain's house. His car veered off the road at a curve, and he died at the scene, despite the paramedics' attempts to save him. His death was a shock to everyone, but it hit his mother the hardest. From that moment on, she dedicated her life to finding someone to blame. Enda blamed Maeva for her son's death. She would show up at her house and threaten her, saying that Maeva would pay for her son being in the grave. Scared, Maeva filed a police report detailing how Rudolph's mother had threatened to kill her. This report was supposed to ease the tension, but it only made things worse. Every day, Enda told her husband that Maeva was to blame for their loss and that he needed to do something about it. In the end, Rouberrois started to believe that it was his destiny to avenge his son's death. 2 months before the tragedy, he showed up at Maeva and Alain's house with threats and accusations. Staring down at Maeva, he said she was responsible for his son Rudolph's death and that he wouldn't stop until he got his revenge. He mentioned his connections and money, adding insults that only escalated the tension in the family. This warning was a dark omen of the horror that would unfold later. 8 months after Rudolph's death, Beroy moved from words to actions. He broke into Alain and Maeva's home when she was the only one there, asleep next to their young son, Lorenzo. In that fatal moment, she found herself trapped, face to face with a man consumed by rage, which had completely overtaken his ability to think clearly. This uncontrollable fury ended in a horrific outcome. Investigators were still working to determine what role his wife, Enda Beroy, had played in the crime. Though Enda claimed she had nothing to do with the murder, she was involved in its aftermath. When Rue came home after what he'd done, she told him to get rid of Maeva's purse, the one piece of evidence that could have shed light on what happened that night. In her testimony, Enda denied knowing about her husband's plans. She said he had completely lost his mind and acted on his own. She insisted to investigators that she had never asked him to do anything and didn't know he had committed the crime because of her. Still, despite her claims, suspicions of her involvement lingered. Her behavior during the trial spoke volumes. Enda seemed more concerned about her own fate, nervously glancing at the lawyers, reporters, and judges. She was more worried about the possibility of getting a 3-year prison sentence than the fact that her husband was facing life behind bars. On the witness stand, she showed no remorse for what had happened, focusing only on avoiding jail time herself. During the trial, Rouberrois didn't admit to planning the murder in advance. The issue of whether his wife had provoked him never came up in court, but many believed Enda played a part in the crime. She had manipulated her husband, constantly pressuring him to believe that he needed to act, something he might never have done on his own. Even in the courtroom, she cast cold, controlling glances at him, as if still trying to direct his testimony. In the end, Rouberrois was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of Maeva. His wife, Enda, received a 2-year sentence for ordering the destruction of Maeva's purse, a key piece of evidence. Maeva's relatives felt the punishment was too light, especially for Enda, whom they saw as the manipulator who pushed her husband to commit the crime. However, neither Rue nor Enda appealed the sentences. After Maeva's death, their son Lorenzo was left alone. At first, he was cared for by a child psychologist to help him cope with the loss of his mother. Eventually, Lorenzo went to live with other relatives, and his life slowly began to stabilize. There's little known about what happened to Alain. What remains in the hearts of those who knew Maeva are the photos and videos of a woman whose life was brutally cut short by hatred and revenge aimed at her family. This story is a powerful example of how hate, grief, and the inability to cope with loss can destroy not just one life, but entire families. The tragedy began with the death of Rudolph, who was a victim of his own recklessness, but for his parents, it was an unbearable loss. Enda Beroy's obsession with revenge led to even greater harm, as she manipulated her husband, feeding off his pain, and ultimately drove him to commit a horrific crime. Maeva and her son Lorenzo became innocent victims of destructive emotions that no one could control. While Rouberrois was responsible for his actions, he was driven by guilt and hatred skillfully fueled by his wife. This tragedy highlights how important it is to manage grief before it turns into a desire for revenge. In the end, neither revenge nor punishment brought peace to anyone involved in this drama. One family lost a daughter, mother, and wife, while another lost a son. It's a heartbreaking and painful story. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.
This story is about a woman whose life is filled with lies from beginning to end. You will learn how the unscrupulous deceiver ends up in pursuit of big money and how many human destinies it can affect. Michelle grew up in the town of Hurst in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. The girl's mother left home in search of a better life, so the upbringing of children was the father. It was not easy for a man to raise two daughters alone. He survived on occasional earnings at a construction site and often relied on alcohol. In search of easy money, he repeatedly thought up and implemented devious plans for profit. He would take a job at one factory or another and deliberately injure himself in order to obtain insurance money compensation. The fraud scheme worked, but not for long. With the help of CCTV cameras at one of the workplaces, the scheme was uncovered, and Michelle and Laura's father was sent into custody. Michelle grew up in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation from childhood. This was her normal life, from which she wanted to escape by any means possible. But it is impossible to escape from herself, because lies have already become a part of her life, and she simply did not know how to live differently. The girl dreams of growing up faster to get out of the hated poverty. At the age of 15, Michelle looks very spectacular, a petite brunette of athletic build. She attracts a lot of interest from guys both of her own and older age. Even then, Michelle realizes that with the help of her feminine power and charm, she can easily manage to manipulate any men in her environment in order to get what she wants. So in her life begins a series of love relationships with different men. At the age of 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries for the first time to 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien. She informs the boyfriend that she is expecting a baby. Kenneth, taking full responsibility for his young wife and future child, enlists in the army. The couple moves frequently. 2 more children are born to them in this marriage. One city is replaced by another. Temporary housing of the military was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. Such a life does not suit her, and after 5 years, she leaves, naming the reason for divorce beatings and cheating on the part of her husband. Michelle returns to her native Hearst. In front of relatives and friends, she appears as a victim of domestic violence and receives the necessary support and begins to organize her life anew. After a while, she falls in love with her former classmate Brandon. The young man is head over heels in love with Michelle and gladly accepted her 3 children. The lovers prepare for the wedding. However, on the eve of the wedding, Michelle infuriates Brandon. It turns out that the girl did not divorce her first husband. She was very afraid to talk to him about divorce because of the abuse, so she did not send the documents. With the help of a lawyer, this issue was quickly settled and the couple was able to marry in 1994. At first, family life flowed calmly and measured. Brandon was engaged in the development of his IT company, and Michelle worked as a dental assistant. But quiet family life was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. She has always needed more. She starts bringing home all sorts of dental equipment and supplies. The cash doesn't fit in her purse. Brandon suspected something wrong. Eventually, Michelle was caught stealing. It was only by luck that a trial was avoided. But Brandon's trust issues with his wife were just beginning. Responding to neighbors' reports that cars were frequently arriving at the house while he was at work, Brandon installed a tape recorder in several rooms of the house. Listening to the tape, he heard various men visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon does his own little investigation and learns that the reason for the divorce in Michelle's first marriage was her numerous infidelities, not her husband's beatings, as she told everyone. Brandon's patience broke, and he demanded a divorce. Michelle was furious that Brandon initiated the divorce, and while he was at work, she got back at him. "I had a very nice saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish in it," Brandon says. "She poured Comet into it and killed all the fish." But Michelle didn't stop there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle stuffed the dog with sleeping pills, which led to the death of the living creature. Michelle put Domino to sleep.
If you're shocked at this point, we've only scratched the surface, Brandon says. It was a nightmare that wouldn't stop. You can't make that girl go away. Unfortunately, Brandon learned the truth about Michelle when his own marriage was completely destroyed. Everything Michelle did with Brandon Dixon pales in comparison to her adventures with other men. It was later revealed that John Paul Ray, also a student at the high school Michelle attended in Hearst, was the father of her first child. Instead of revealing this information to John, she told Kenneth O'Brien that the child was his, forcing him to marry her. Kenneth, for 13 years, thought the eldest son was his own. John later told police that Kenneth paid child support from age 5 to 18 and did not know he was not the father. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived in a common-law marriage for 8 years. The relationship came to an abrupt end when John began to suspect his wife of cheating. Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair on the side. John moved out, leaving most of Michelle's possessions. Michelle's next love was Greg Williams. They were both not so young anymore. Both had a history of past marital failures. The man was married twice and had a daughter. After Greg and Katie divorced in 2003, the couple agreed to share custody of their common daughter, Taylor. However, there was no formal agreement on child support because the former spouses had a good relationship. Rich, successful, and generous Greg was a perfect match for Michelle. In 2007, Greg and Michelle had a common daughter, Michaela. A year later, they got married. Their marriage was like the American dream. Money, children, love, it was all in abundance. Michelle seemed to have made it through the thorns to the stars and got the life she had always dreamed of. Greg Williams held his family in very high esteem. He grew up in a family with fierce principles and achieved everything on his own from an early age. He loved sports and was a martial arts black belt. In addition to his love of exercise, Greg was also a fan of guns. Both he and Michelle had guns that they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle's gun, a silver .40 caliber pistol, was kept in a safe, but Greg kept his gun, a black Liebherr .45 caliber, always loaded in a case under his bedside table. The couple was determined to make their marriage a success. They threw birthday parties for their children from other marriages at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children would have barbecues and swim parties. Very often the house was full of friends. But despite the picturesque suburban home and a precocious daughter, Greg and Michelle were not the classic American couple. They met through an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their wild adult house parties led to numerous complaints from neighbors. Without making the matter public, the couple decides to move out. The night before, Michelle and Greg had been unable to sleep for a long time. They were preparing to buy a new house for $4.5 million. They emotionally discussed the upcoming event. Greg stayed in the bedroom alone. Michelle went out to her crying daughter and fell asleep with her in the room. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call came in. A crying woman screamed into the phone that she and her husband had been attacked by a robber. She was injured, and her husband had been shot. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Inside the home, detectives found a television on full volume and a baby sleeping on the couch. Michelle's daughter was sound asleep and unaffected in any way by the attack that occurred. The woman's behavior alerted police officers. She was behaving rather strangely and did not look like she had just experienced a burglary. Soon, the gated community was filled with police cars, detectives, and forensic experts. The lot was cordoned off, and police searched every inch of the nearly 5,000-square-foot home.
Michelle was fully dressed, had her hair styled, and was acting very calm. She told police she was asleep, but her clothing and demeanor said otherwise. As the only witness, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for questioning. After several hours of talking to police and investigators, Michelle's story began to fall apart like a house of cards. According to the woman, the intruder, dressed in all black, hit her on the head with a wrench. She fell from the blow, but was conscious and heard a gunshot. The stranger then fled through the back door of the house. Michelle Williams's account did not match what police saw at the scene. Greg Williams was shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun, presumably used by the intruder, was found near the back door next to a wrench. There were no fingerprints on either weapon. Neither was found to show any signs of forced entry. The family's valuables and money were untouched. Examined CCTV footage from a neighbor's camera showed that only one car had entered the gated community in the hours before the crime. Police confirmed that the car belonged to a newspaper delivery man. To confuse the investigation, Michelle came up with a version of the attack. She hit herself with a wrench and made their large house look like the scene of the attack. But detectives did their due diligence and noticed a number of details that didn't add up. Michelle Williams was fully dressed, her hair was styled, and she had fresh makeup on her face. It gave the impression as if she was waiting for someone. The gun used during the crime was found in the house without any fingerprints, and the final detail that proved Michelle's lie was the $20,000 in cash that was not stolen in the robbery. Michelle had no explanation for why a successful businessman and devoted father decided to take his own life, but she was able to explain her behavior. Michelle claimed she wanted to spare their young daughter the bitter truth about her father's self-inflicted death. She admitted to police that she wiped down the gun and washed Greg's hands to cover up fingerprints before desperately staging a home invasion and calling emergency services. As bizarre as that explanation was, it became obvious to police why no evidence was found in the house. Michelle admitted to wiping the crime scene with bleach and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to present a more realistic picture of the attack. From the beginning, Keller police doubted the credibility of Michelle's testimony. But at the time, no physical evidence was presented linking her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was soon released home. Around 5 p.m. on the evening of her husband's murder, Michelle went to her sister Laura's home and did not mention the late Greg's name once during the evening. Michelle cried from time to time, but it didn't seem sincere, her sister Laura Cusick said when questioned by police. The morning after the tragedy, Michelle woke up in a great mood. She was beautifully dressed, with her hair styled and makeup on. In high spirits, the recent widow went for breakfast at a famous restaurant that served the best pancakes with syrup. While the police were looking into the theory that Greg had taken his own life, struggling to find a motive and obtain credible evidence of it, Michelle herself presented the investigation with first a motive and then evidence of her guilt. Going through the documents from the first interrogation, the investigators were attracted by Michelle's words that she didn't care about a single penny. But her actions proved otherwise. After Greg's death, Michelle quickly begins liquidating assets from family companies and spending large sums of money. She cashes checks through Greg's IT company. The amount of checks cashed is not disclosed anywhere. In all likelihood, we are talking about a lot of money. After receiving cash from the sale of the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made one of her biggest blunders. She went to the insurance company, hoping to get a payout on Greg's life insurance policy. Michelle was the sole beneficiary on Greg's life insurance policy, which was taken out on August 12, 2011, almost exactly 2 months before he was killed. But one important fact the woman missed. According to the terms of the insurance policy, Greg's death was not an insured event because he left his life voluntarily, and at the last moment, she was denied the money. The desire to get the insured sum of $600,000 was the main motive for the crime. Later, another important fact of financial fraud comes to light that casts suspicion on the widow. Fictitious financial documents for a mortgage loan were used to purchase the house that Greg and Michelle had been preparing for on the eve of his death. The account numbers were intentionally changed, and the lender did not immediately notice the elaborate fraud. When Greg died, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account was not discussed until it caught the attention of the police. Michelle, confident of her impunity, writes a check for $18,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn and takes a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During the 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police were able to unravel his wife's web of deceit. An autopsy was performed on Greg, which proves that the man was shot from a range of 12 to 18 inches. Moreover, the toxicology examination conducted provided a report proving that Greg had a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Also, the police determined that there was no assault on the house. Mrs. Williams sedated her husband and shot him from a foot away after turning up the volume on the television. Daughter Michelle, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, based on the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, Greg Williams's death was officially ruled a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th as she was on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. Michelle was both the only witness to the crime and the only suspect. Bail was set at $522,000 to be released from custody pending a court hearing. But Michelle spent a week in custody and was released on $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, Michelle walked out of jail with a GPS monitor and under the arm of attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who was now officially representing her. Greg's first wife, Kathy, was furious when she found out that attorney Wincorn was defending Michelle. That money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it should never have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman who was accused of killing him. Online court records list Kenneth Wincorn as the attorney for Katie and Greg's divorce in 2003, and Wincorn's name and signature appear on legal documents regarding the custody agreement for their shared daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Kenneth Wincorn's defense of collusion with Michelle Williams will be exonerated by providing evidence. The divorce was handled by his company, and he personally never represented Greg. Kenneth Wincorn said he first learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. It was very shocking, Wincorn says, adding that Michelle later sought his help. After her plot to cash in on Greg's death is foiled, Michelle Williams changes her name to Shelley and appears as a fitness guru hoping to start a new life. On Facebook, Shelley publicly announced her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and heavily promoted it online. Armed with an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracker, Michelle spent the next few months enjoying her new boyfriend, fitness classes, and court hearings. She often appeared in court dressed for a night out on the town, wearing miniskirts, knee-length boots, and deep-cut blouses. She never mourned Greg's death for a second, says Greg's ex-wife, Kathy. Rob Conover was friends with Greg Williams for more than 20 years and attended many of Michelle's hearings. He recalls how she deftly manipulated police officers at the courthouse, making them see her as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle Williams took a plea deal with the county and pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. She will receive 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and for deadly dangerous conduct, a third-degree felony that only exists in a few states. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. Things can go differently. Play big, win big, or lose big, Michelle said in an interview. With the plea bargain, I expect to do a couple years, and after that, I'll be out on parole. But in February 2014, Michelle Williams, in an interview, suddenly changes her testimony and says she is not guilty of the crime. The judge immediately rescinds the plea bargain and sets a date for the first trial. Opening arguments have begun in the trial of a Texas woman, dubbed by the media as Keller's Black Widow, who was accused of intentionally targeting her husband in 2011 for an insurance payoff. Michelle Williams, 45, was charged with the crime. In court, prosecutors described the crime as a clearly planned scheme of acts to profit from Greg's substantial life insurance policy. In their opening statement, prosecutors told jurors that Mrs. Williams shot her husband in the head after drugging him with sleeping pills beforehand in order to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money, time-tested money, greed, Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland said in court. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. In response to an interview request, Michelle's attorney released a statement on her behalf. Attorney Kenneth Wincorn described the difficulties in the case caused by the spotlessly clean crime scene. The prosecution struggled to prove a premeditated crime, disregarding the fact that there was no DNA from the suspect. In repeated searches, cleaning products were found, but it stands to reason that Michelle's fingerprints were on them, since the products were in the house where she lived and did the cleaning. If the jury concludes that Michelle tampered with evidence of Greg's death, making it look like the man had spontaneously passed away and then cleaned up the crime scene by hiding evidence and then lying about it, she will get a life sentence. But if Michelle is sentenced as scheduled on April 21st, no jury will ever get a chance to hear the whole story and decide on the appropriate punishment. Through careful questioning of the Williams couple's friends and acquaintances, information regularly emerged about the unfavorable environment that had prevailed in their family for a long period of time. According to the studied correspondence in social networks and messengers, it was found that the couple quarreled very often, and the reason was finances. At the trial, prosecutors said that in the hours leading up to the violent death, Greg Williams argued with his wife over their finances and even slapped her for spending a large amount of money that had been set aside as a down payment on a house. But Michelle Williams' defense argued that Greg Williams had taken his own life and that the successful business owner needed his wife alive, not dead. According to defense attorney Clay Graham, Greg Williams often suffered from depression and regularly used sedatives and steroids. On the eve of the crime, he was allegedly severely depressed due to the loss of his grandmother and best friend, who ironically had taken his own life. Defense counsel told the court that when Michelle Williams found her husband dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, she panicked and in a fit of fear began to cover up the tragedy without realizing it. She had one goal: to protect her 4-year-old daughter from psychological trauma by hiding the truth from her. Michelle Williams never once changed herself, presenting at court hearings in different images, with styled hair and manicure. At one hearing, the defendant, dressed in an off-white blouse and black vest, showed little emotion throughout most of the trial, but did not forget to wipe away tears during a presentation of photographs showing images of the body of murdered Greg Williams. The court also heard testimony from Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, who said his mother, Michelle Williams, asked him to help frame Greg Williams' ex-wife, Kathy. She planned to blame her for Greg's death using the motive of unreconciled differences over the custody of their daughter, Taylor. But that plan was a failure from the get-go. After all, there was never any disagreement between the former spouses about the custody of their daughter, and it would have been very difficult to prove otherwise. Asked about his reaction to his mother's unusual request, 26-year-old Andrew O'Brien said he was very shocked by such a proposal and thought she was having a mental breakdown. Michelle confronted her sons at the trial when they testified against her. The jury later found Michelle guilty of felony tampering with physical evidence. According to the show, she provided false information that she was pregnant with twins, hoping to delay her sentencing. But this version was not confirmed and the verdict was announced. Michelle's acting abilities and her natural charm, which she tried her best to demonstrate during each hearing, did not spare her from a harsh sentence. Sandwiched between a scenario in which she was a cold-blooded criminal and one in which she was portrayed as a deranged wife and mother acting on impulse, Michelle chose the latter. "He did it," she said, wrapping her arms around her head. Michelle even congratulated the detective on solving the case. "I wouldn't have gotten through the day," she said. "You've won." Even before the police admitted to doubting Michelle's story, few believed Greg had lost his life. He had too much to live for, and he knew all too well how much pain an untimely death causes. Kathy Williams believes that Michelle's relationship with Gene Wallace began when Greg was still alive and may be the elusive motive for this crime. If Greg had found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have dumped her, and she would have gotten nothing. Katie says, "Greg was willing to put up with a lot, but he wasn't willing to put up with cheating." "She's ruined so many lives you can't even imagine," Brandon says. "She's a professional manipulator. If the courts had gone further and interviewed all of us, things could have gone in a different direction." Michelle was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The judge also ruled that she would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Michelle currently remains incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Michelle Williams is a felon and fraudster who is currently serving time in prison for all of her willful acts. She has never shown remorse for her actions and still refuses to take full responsibility for her crime.
Truth is something that exists in reality and corresponds to the real state of affairs, But sometimes it is difficult to accept the truth, and a person creates a lie, which sincerely begins to believe and convince others. 11 young men and 1 girl met in a hotel room to celebrate the new year. Strange collaboration, you will think, and you will be right. But wait. There is one fact that will completely change your opinion. The men at this party are all members of a sexual minority, which means that 12 friends just met to have fun and celebrate the year 2021. And indeed, they celebrated the new year very cheerfully, so much so that on January 1st, the company had to take the only girl to the hospital, where doctors declared her death. But who was she? How did she die, and was anyone charged in connection with her death? But that's all in order. Next, let's break down the past party almost minute by minute, see what happened on the fateful night, and you'll definitely understand why we started this story with the notion of truth. So on December 31st, 2020, in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, at the 4-star City Garden Grand Hotel, John Paul de Lucerne checked in at 11 a.m. Christine DeSera checked in later, and during the day, 9 other guys checked into room 2207 and room 2209, which were on the same floor. Hotel manager John Paul Khalili joined the merry company just after midnight. New Year's Eve night was all about fun, dancing, and alcohol, lots of alcohol. Rommel Galita woke up around 10 a.m. and noticed Christine sleeping in the bathtub. He covered her with a blanket and went back to sleep. When he woke up several hours later, he found her unconscious and beginning to turn blue. Christine was taken to the hospital by 3 friends and hotel staff, but upon arrival at the emergency room, doctors only pronounced her dead. The 11 guys with the only girl spent the entire night in the hotel room, and she was dead by morning. News headlines about the crime shocked the public. Everyone imagined the story the same way, because it was obvious what a group of young guys and 1 girl could do all night. But what really happened that New Year's Eve night, and from what Christine DeSera died, was to be solved by the investigation. Christine Angelica DeSera was born on April 13, 1997, into the well-to-do family of John Nestor DeSera and Sharon Rose Faba DeSera, and grew up in Barangay San Isidro, General Santos City. She grew up an outgoing, intelligent, and independent girl. Kristen was a loving sister to her 3 siblings, Monica, Chloe, and JJ. After graduating from high school, she moved to the larger and more promising city of Davao, on the shores of the bay of the same name. There she enrolled in university. Christine studied diligently, danced, modeled, and was active on social media. Christine was also the epitome of beauty and intelligence. In 2017, she graduated with honors from the University of the Philippines Mindanao in Davao City, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Arts with a major in Media Arts. The girl has been actively involved in modeling and theatrical performances. On August 5, 2017, she competed against 8 other contenders for the title of Miss Silva Davao 2017 at the New City Commercial Corporation Mall in Davao City. She came in 2nd place. In June 2018, she participated in the annual fashion show. From September 2017 to January 2019, she worked as a marketing consultant for Gaisano Malls in different parts of Mindanao, including Davao City, General Santos City, Tagum, Toril, and Digos. Christine's life has been colorful and fulfilling. In February 2019, her life's dream came true. She moved to Manila to start working as a flight attendant for PAL Express, a subsidiary of Philippine Airlines. Christine DeSera's last flight as a flight attendant was on December 28, 2020. Christine's death was immediately publicized, due to which numerous discussions and theories were formed in the community. Initially, the police suspected that Kristen was most likely abused and killed by a group of guys she was partying with on New Year's Eve. Even without autopsy results and a toxicology report, Makati City Police filed preliminary charges of assault and murder against 11 men. The Philippine National Police declared the case closed. Arrests were made with charges and identification of suspects. 3 of the party participants were detained after surrendering to authorities on their own. But the main answer to what really caused Christine's death
was the forensic medical report. The autopsy of Christine's body was conducted in Pasay City at the Rizal Funeral Home under the direction of Forensic Medical Officer Police Major Michael Nick Sartiento. On January 3, 2021, the examination of Christine Dasser's body was completed, and a forensic report was issued which found that death was due to natural causes due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. However, it also mentioned bruises on the girl's right arm, right thigh, knees, ankles, and right foot, as well as a linear abrasion on her right thigh. Deeply healed lacerations and abrasions were also reported during the genital exam. The National Capital Region Police Department announced that a special investigation team had been set up to look into the case, but Christine's family was unwilling to accept the fact that a young, vibrant girl could die a natural death prematurely. At a press conference on January 5, 2021, Christine Dasser's family stated that they had seen the autopsy report that said she died of an aneurysm. However, they stated that the autopsy performed was incomplete and requested a second autopsy. The parents of the deceased have been trying to understand how Christine's aorta was ruptured. After all, the police and the Dasser family lawyer believed that the aneurysm was the result of assault or abuse, which means it was not a natural death, and the perpetrators should be punished. The prosecutor's office identified all of the 11 men who were with Christine throughout the night. Some of them were her co-workers. Other young men were friends of her friends whom Christine was meeting for the first time. It turned out that Christine was the initiator of this party. She had booked the hotel room herself a few days in advance and coordinated this party with her friends. Her mom, Sharon, was aware of her daughter's friendship with men and never opposed it. Since childhood, Kristen had found it easier to socialize and make friends with the male gender, so it was considered normal in their family. In addition, she and her friends usually did not go home for vacations, so it became a tradition for them to meet each other every year. Kristen was able to call her family just after midnight to inform them of the ongoing celebration at the Makati Hotel and to wish her family a happy new year. During the video call, the family could see Kristen's friends and the surrounding festive environment. However, there has been new speculation about the abuse allegation, so in the case, the main evidence of the incident became the frames of the video from the hotel lobby, the study of which helped the police almost minute by minute to reconstruct the picture of what happened. It should be noted that the party was to be held in room 2209. It was this room and booked Christine Dasser. The main events begin to unfold in the late afternoon. At 11:21 p.m., Christine leaves room 2209 and goes to room 2207. At 11:38 p.m., the company returns to their room. Christine goes last. She is holding her shoes in a glass. At 2:50 a.m., Christine, holding the hand of a new acquaintance, Valentine, goes to room 2207. While they are at a neighbor's house, a hotel employee brings an extra mattress to room 2209. At 2:52 a.m., Valentine accompanies Christine to her room. Valentine's gait shows that the girl is already quite drunk. Her gait is too relaxed, and she is holding a bottle in her hand. The friends stop at the door, and Christine suddenly kisses Valentine, but the man quickly pulls away, after which the couple goes inside. At 3:15 a.m., Christine hurriedly leaves her room and goes to her neighbor's room, and 6 minutes later, one of the guys leaves there. He heads to room 2209, presumably to call his friends. At 3:22 a.m., Christine Dasser can be seen chatting with another man in the next room on the right side of the hallway, while two other men walk past them. She looked upset. Suddenly, Christine hugs one of her friends, and then they disappear from the view of the cameras altogether. At 4:13 a.m., John de Lucerne can be seen carrying Christine back to the first room. At 4:22 a.m., the camera again captures Christine at the door of room 2207. It's unclear what brought her there again. She practically falls off her feet, and a guy who looks like John de Lucerne picks her up by the waist and carries her to room 2209. Christine looks pretty drunk. At 5:05 a.m., the camera captures Christine laughing as she runs away from a guy who looks like Louis de Lima. Afterward, they're standing outside room 2207. Christine looks normal, and with him she enters room 2209. At 6:23 a.m., Christine makes her last appearance on camera alive. For the last time, Valentine carries her in his arms from room 2207. The girl is conscious. It was obviously an eventful night, but the most important truth still remains behind the scenes. The party continued until dawn. Around 12 noon, when Christine was found unconscious in the bathtub, her friends carried her to the floor and repeatedly attempted cardiopulmonary resuscitation. After unsuccessful attempts, they called for help at the front desk. A few minutes later, the hotel manager and the head of security arrived in the room. They used a wheelchair to lower Christine to the first floor of the hotel. Rommel Galido accompanied Christine to the hospital. The doctors unfortunately only stated the girl's death. Rommel called Christine's mom and broke the bad news. It can be assumed that what is happening really looks like a fun party, and definitely to be in one room such a large company was cramped, so young people chaotically moved all night from room to room. But the investigators had suspicions about the use of illegal substances to enhance the effect of alcohol. When questioned, some of the detainees claimed that there were no illegal substances during the party, but only whiskey and tequila. It is worth noting that illegal drugs were initially the centerpiece of the investigation, as the testimony of one of the detainees reported that Christine had doubts about the contents of the drinks and suggested that someone may have spiked it with an unknown substance. It transpired that guests were asked to bring their own food and drinks. Because of this, there was speculation that Christine Dassera's drink was poisoned and could have triggered the aneurysm that eventually led to her death. But the autopsy report stated that no alcohol or illegal drugs taken the night before her death would cause this type of aortic dilatation or defect. Substance information was later unconfirmed, as no illegal substances or traces of them were found in the room or in the suspect's personal belongings. An examination and search of the two rooms, as well as the neighboring room 2009, looking for potential evidence, did not yield the desired results that at least indirectly proved the violent death of Christine Dacerna. Under questioning, Mark Rosales and John de la Serna publicly admitted their unconventional orientation and stated that Christine was their best friend and they would never hurt her. John also revealed that they had to bring Christine back from room 2207 because she was already vomiting early in the morning. Rommel Galido said that around 10 a.m. he found Christine in the bathtub of their room and thought she was asleep, so he just covered her with a blanket. However, around noon, after he woke up and went back to wake her up, he realized the girl was blue and not breathing. He rushed to his friends for help. The hotel advised that she be rushed to Makati Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead on arrival, reportedly due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The hospital reported the death to the Makati City Police. Meanwhile, other men from a neighboring hotel room had left by then. On January 4th, the Philippine National Police sent a separate statement to the media about the Christine Dacer incident, saying that the case is almost solved despite some missing details and conflicting reports on the matter. Police Chief Debold Sinas said they already have 3 suspects, and they have been apprehended. Other suspects were being sought. But as early as January 6th, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office ordered the release of the 3 men who were in custody due to lack of evidence. Prosecutors insisted that the evidence presented was insufficient to establish that Christine was abused. They also said that even if Christine Dacer was abused, the police have yet to prove that this is what caused her death. Moreover, the party was a gathering of men of non-traditional orientation where they were all flirting with each other, and Christine was an extra woman. Rommel Galido, as well as most of those present at the party, were stewards and co-workers of Christine Dacera at PL Airlines, indicating that she was well acquainted with these men and their orientation. On January 13, 2021, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office launched a preliminary investigation and based on an official autopsy that confirmed that the 23-year-old died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm.
The prosecutor's office also called on the police to release the results of the victim's DNA analysis, toxicology report, and histopathic study. However, Christine's mother, Sharon DeSera, criticized the report that her daughter was not abused. She appeared on a news show where she claimed that her daughter was abused by a group of guys. If you see Christine's body, if you're a mother, you'll probably feel the pain that Christine suffered because of them. But my daughter can't talk anymore because she's dead. The woman spoke out on the TV program. Sharon cited the lacerations and bruises on her daughter's body, which were not recorded in the autopsy, as evidence that the report was inaccurate. Christine's family later said they wanted another autopsy to challenge authorities' initial findings that she died a natural death. The basis was injuries and bruising that were not documented in the first report. Family spokesperson Brick Reyes said that the injuries on the victim's legs and arms, as well as her remains, would provide sufficient evidence that Christine was abused. Brick Reyes also said that they believe the young woman was drugged and abused before she died. Christine was already intoxicated and complained that something seemed to have been spiked in her drink during the New Year's Eve celebration. Christine's parents said they have filed a complaint demanding the immediate dismissal of Michael Nick Sarmiento for gross negligence and gross incompetence in preparing Christine's forensic report and death certificate. Dr. Marissy Ramos, a friend of Dasser's family, told reporters that the body was subjected to a second autopsy. He also emphasized that the biological fluids recovered from the second autopsy have been forwarded to the Death Investigation Unit, which will provide more details after a final evaluation and consolidation of all the findings of its forensic team. The pathology autopsy results from the Southern Police District Crime Lab Division's forensic report, which was eventually shared on social media, showed that the cause of death was consistent with what was previously reported as a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The official autopsy revealed that Christina was not abused on the night of her death. The actual cause of Dassera's death lies in the aorta. The constant increase in blood pressure in the aorta caused the defect to weaken, and eventually the aorta ruptured, the Philippine National Police Crime Lab report said. At the time the aorta rupture occurred, there was blood loss, so Christine felt various symptoms such as weakness, nausea, and sweating. The blood loss due to the aortic rupture killed her within a few hours, the report said. This means that the girl had a ruptured aortic aneurysm, which enlarged the lower part of the main vessel, aorta, that supplies blood to the entire body. This vessel runs from a person's heart through the chest and abdomen. Since the aorta is the largest vessel in the body, if it ruptures, a person can lose a huge amount of blood and potentially be fatal, as in this case. In addition, it was noted that Christine's aneurysm did not occur recently. It started a long time ago. The report states that dilatation is a chronic condition and was present long before her death. Had she not died that fateful night, she would still have died in any scenario that would cause her blood pressure to rise enough to rupture the aneurysm. The autopsy also revealed that DeSera's heart was enlarged compared to a healthy heart, further confirming Christina Dassera's undiagnosed hypertension. For the most part, it can be confirmed that the girl's death was due to natural causes. But the widespread misinformation brought shame and persecution to those 11 young guys who were at the party and sincerely tried to give Christine first aid, but they were labeled as criminals. All 11 guys who were charged preliminarily have since been released from custody. The Makati City Prosecutor's Office tried to rectify the situation and said that at the time of the publicity, the evidence presented was not enough to establish that Christine Dassera was abused, and it was impossible to obtain proper evidence at that time. Therefore, they had to build a version based on signs of deterioration of the victim's body. In addition, 2 other suspects said that the police forced them to give false testimony that there were illegal drugs at the New Year's Eve party. Another participant in the story explained his kiss with Christine, which was captured by surveillance cameras on the eve of her death. According to the man, it was Christine herself who initiated it. He, however, tried to push her away. Law enforcement officials were criticized for not conducting a thorough toxicological examination when the flight attendant's body was found. The charges against the men were later dropped due to lack of evidence. The death of Christine de Serra attracted widespread media attention as a result of suspicious circumstances that seemed to contradict the findings of the Philippine National Police. Christine's case continued to receive a lot of publicity online as further developments came from her family, who in no way could accept the truth and believe in the natural death of their daughter. The girl's mother, Sharon, appealed to President Rodrigo Duterte for help in seeking justice for her daughter. "I am an ordinary person. You also have a daughter. I want to speak out openly because I don't want anyone to be victimized by the kind of cruelty and barbarism like my Christine." Christine Dacara was buried at Forest Lake Memorial Park in her hometown of General Santos, more than a week after her death. A wave of condolences, reposts, and farewells traveled across the social stanzas of Kristen's friends and co-workers. Ultimately, the unconventional case of Kristen Dacara serves as a prime example of when the media spreads misinformation and how it can affect the public as well as impact those involved. As we come to the end, the story wants to return to the truth, which sooner or later, but in any form, is bound to take its place of honor. After all, the truth is one. But Christine's family is still convinced that the girl was killed by these people and that there is something secret in this story. Personally, I do not understand and found no answers to the question about bruises and wounds on Christine's body. Why was it hushed up? It seems that despite the presence of wounds and bruises on Christine's body, the cause of her death was not them, but the rupture of the aorta due to heart disease, so they did not focus on the wounds on her body. In my opinion, there are a lot of oddities and inconsistencies in this case, but you guys are the judge. I would like to wish Christine's family to accept the irreparable loss, because young guys, whether they are guilty or not, will end up remembering the same sad story every New Year's Eve and making excuses for the rest of their lives.
Paula Andrea Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Milian, was from Maturina, Menegas. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, was from Tucupitu, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A year after Paula was born in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were looking for a better life for themselves and their daughter a month after moving to Quito, capital of Ecuador. Relationship in the family deteriorated for a number of reasons. Andreina decided to break up with Leonardo and soon moved to Cuenca, the third largest city in Ecuador. She took Paula with her. In Cuenca lived the mother of her best friend, who kindly offered to let her and the girl stay in the house while they found another place to live and work. Leonardo, the girl's father, given the breakup and other circumstances, decided to return to Venezuela, to his hometown of Tucupitu, and after a while immigrated again, this time to Trinidad, Tobago. At the time, Leonardo had already been disabled for a long time. The man's left arm had been completely disabled after an accident he had suffered while driving a motorcycle at a very young age. Since the man could not use his left arm, it was apparently difficult for him to find a good job even in Ecuador's capital city. After Andreina moved to Cuenca, she almost completely stopped communicating with Leonardo, only informing him once that she has taken a job on a farm in Tapacundo. A few months after separating from Leonardo, Andreina entered into a new romantic relationship with a man named Washington Andreas Aymado. Andreas was a local Ecuadorian, and more importantly, he was the owner of the farm where Andreina worked. The man grew up in a wealthy family. When Paula was about a year and a half, Andreina moved to Anand together with Paula. Andreas and Andreina had a child together on April 7, 2019. With a newborn baby, family became happier and more united. However, everything changed when an event happened on March 27, 2020. It completely changed the lives of everyone involved. At the time, family was living well, enjoying every day, and things were going well on the farm. On one such day, as happy as it seemed, Andreas took Paula and by car went with her to the flower plantations. On the way there, girl got very sick. She became dizzy and began to vomit. Andreas had no choice but to stop at the public restroom. As soon as he and the girl entered it, Paula vomited again. He decided to leave her alone for a few minutes and went back to the car to find a change of clothes, since the girl's clothes were all dirty. When Andreas returned, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl, and the man immediately pulled the girl out, tried to give her first aid, and soon brought her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was handed over to doctors, she no longer showed any signs of life. Doctors stated Paula dead. After the doctors on duty performed an initial examination and assessed the girl's condition, they realized that the story Andreas told them was full of inconsistencies. For example, the doctors determined that the first glance that the girl had bruises on her body and face, the nature of which could not be attributed to the information her foster father told them. Medical protocol in such cases requires doctors to contact the police. Indeed, the situation itself suggested this. Shortly after the police arrived, Andreas was arrested as a suspect in Paula's murder. Although Andreas said Paula has drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy of the body revealed something much darker. First of all, the test showed that the girl had been dead for about 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital, which doesn't fit with the man's version of events. The girl's foster father claims that he gave Paula first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that all happened just 20 minutes before he took her to the hospital. On the other hand, the autopsy found that the girl has several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which caused her death. It became apparent that Paula's death was not an accident, as her small body has a significant number of both recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, the girl's father, learned of Paula's death on March 30, 3 days after the events. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, had informed him of his daughter's death by the phone. She herself, in turn, learned it from Andreina's friend. It should be mentioned that after Leonardo has left Ecuador and Andreina had started a new relationship, she stopped all communication with him. That is why, for 3 days, Leonardo didn't know anything about her tragedy. Until that time, he could see her only through the pictures Andreina and his mutual friends had sent him. In addition, Andreina blocked Leonardo in all social media, preventing him from communicating with Paula. She also cut off communication with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. Andreina even turned almost all of their mutual friends against the girl's birth father, telling them about his lack of desire to communicate with Paula, and so Leonardo was able to learn of his daughter's death. However, Andreina's family informed him of an alternative cause of death. They told him that Paula died of complications caused by COVID. At the time, Ecuador, like the rest of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. At the time, however, there were virtually no deaths from the coronavirus in the country. Leonardo was undoubtedly very suspicious that his daughter might have died from COVID, so he immediately began researching statistics on death from the virus in Ecuador. The statistics were posted on social media and news websites. Leonardo immediately noticed that there were no children among the few victims of the coronavirus in Ecuador. Leonardo's relatives helped him to investigate, and one of them soon sent him a newspaper article that mentioned the arrest of Andreas, who was suspected of killing Paula. Leonardo then began calling Andreina daily, and it wasn't until 10 days later that she decided to call him back herself. In that conversation, Andreina rather coldly informed Leonardo that Paula had died of COVID and that she could not give him more information because her lawyers had forbidden her to do so. The next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page together with an acquaintance of his dedicated to Paula, as well as an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The published posts caused a huge backlash across social media. Their main goal was to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andreina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin dealing with her daughter's funeral, even though the prosecutor who worked on the case asked for more time to investigate the body. But the girl's funeral took place on April 10, 2020. Andreina simply did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on the girl. Thanks to the information posted on social media, Andreina's friends, people in her circle, contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had in the years before her death. They sent the unadultly information they had, most of which was based on isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and similar things. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, girl had to endure abuse from her stepfather as well as her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in all of this. Everyone said that they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone in the presence of her stepfather. The girl looked depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very frightful. At one point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather beat her because of she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her and she hit her head on the wall. Paula called her stepfather nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares, and as a young child she already suffered from insomnia. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time of moving into the stepfather's home, sleep alone. When falling asleep, she often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. In addition, her mother and stepfather forced her to tuck in on her own, without help. Moreover, her mother, Andrea, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old. This was something out of the realm of reason. Paula was forced to cook her own breakfast and dinners because her mother liked to sleep in the mornings and take a break from the baby on the evening. She simply didn't want to take care of her daughter. Not only that, Andrea was not bothered by the fact that the girl has to cope with baking oven by herself, despite the dangers. At the preschool, where mother had placed Paula, girl constantly complained of pain in her legs and back and often stated that she could not walk. Her constant complaints as well as the bruises on her body forced the teacher to show her to the doctors at the health center. After an examination, they concluded that the girl was being mistreated in the family. The girl's teachers then called the special police organization so they could investigate the girl's abuse in her family. Officials took up the case and decided to send the girl somewhere she could be safe while the investigation process was underway. As a result, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle, Andrea's brother. A hearing on the case was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never showed up. For whatever reason, they were unable to attend this hearing. As a result, it was decided to schedule a retrial for February 27, 2020. But even this time, Paula's teachers simply did not show up. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents, and then she was returned to her mother. Exactly 1 month later, on March 27, the girl died. And the exact reason the teachers did not want to attend either of the two hearings is still unknown. It is speculated that Andrea may have bribed the teachers or simply convinced them that, although the girl had some problems, the parents were not responsible for what their daughter said about them. After Paula's death, Andreas was placed in protective custody for the duration of the investigation, but he soon appealed this decision. As a result, a hearing was held on June 12, 2020, in which the judge set a restraining order and also determined that the man could be released to house arrest. But during the hearing, which was held via video conference, Andreas announced that he was dropping his appeal. At the time, Leonardo was still engaged in a social media campaign. He also asked his subscribers for financial support to be able to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. He wanted to file a complaint against Andrea, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At the time, Andrea had not yet been charged and was free. Fortunately, Leonardo was able to obtain sufficient financial aid as well as free legal advice from two Ecuadorian lawyers, Osvaldo and Alejandro, who unselfishly offered him support and assistance in the lawsuit. Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela. He had to risk his life, float on the raft, and then cross the entire border from Naturín to San Cristobal. He had to book private transfers since the pandemic had cancelled all services and he could not use the usual routes to get to Ecuador. Because of the pandemic situation, all maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed. so only few regular flights to 4 or 5 countries could be counted in the following months. Once Leonardo arrived in the state of Táchira, he had to cross the border into Colombia over rugged terrain, dangerous in itself. He then took a bus to the town of Ipalerso and continued on through the hills and plains to the Brumichet Ridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Then Leonardo took a cab and drove to Quito. On June 30, he had a meeting with a lawyer. Immediately upon arrival, father of a deceased girl filed a complaint against the ex-girlfriend to also be considered as a suspect in Paula's murder. On July 6, 2020, Andreas was indicted and the woman appeared in court, which stated that she should not be remained in custody and the house arrest would be sufficient and that she had to report to justice twice a week. As a result, both Andreas and Andreina were charged with murder, the maximum punishment for which in the Ecuadorian Penal Code was about 13 years in prison. In November 2020, the first hearing in the case was held. At the time, a specific date for the start of the trial was still to be announced. During the hearing, Leonardo's attorney spoke to their concern about Andreina's possible escape, as she had previously attempted to take her own life with pills. They also applied for Andreina to be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge decided to grant the lawyer's request and also reduced the number of days the suspect had to appear in court to once a week instead of 2. However, a few days later, Andreina demanded to reconsider the decision of the necessity of wearing an electronic bracelet. On November 16, another hearing was held to reconsider these decisions. Undoubtedly, all these details delayed the trial, but fortunately, the judge was able to set a date. It was set for December. The trial of Andreas and Andreina did not receive extensive media coverage. However, much of the information somehow made its way onto social media. And yet, because of the pandemic, which was a major topic in the information field, some of the facts went unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At the time, there still wasn't any decision made about Andreina's alternative ways of imprisonment, and Andreas was held in the regional detention center. The trial was held behind closed doors, and no representative of the media was present. In addition, some of the participants connected to the hearing via video link. According to the doctor who performed the autopsy on the girl, Paula had nearly all of her spinal discs rebuilt, some of her ribs were broken, and some had already fused. This meant that the girl has broken ribs before, which had eventually healed on their own. She also had nail stigmata, a condition in which the nails grow into the skin, bruises and scratches on her face and body, fluid accumulation in her lungs, scars on her head, and lacerations on her colon. According to the assessment, it was the later injuries that caused the infection to develop and gradually lead to sepsis, which ultimately caused death. The autopsy report also confirmed that by the time Paula was taken to the hospital by Andreas, she had been dead for about 24 hours. The amount of internal and external injuries reflected the level of cruelty to which the little girl had been subjected, as well as the level of carelessness shown by her guardians, who had never once taken her to the doctors. On top of this, the girl was malnourished, underweight, and too diminutive for her age, with mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, Andreina, the girl's mother, tried to convince her family friends that the child has a lot of psychological problems, and that the consequence of these problems was a tendency to self-torture, through which Paula tried to attract attention to herself. According to the girl's mother, when her younger brother was born, Paula began to lack parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and tried to manipulate everyone through crying. The trial also revealed that in October 2019, when Paula was supposed to remain in her uncle's custody, according to the board's decision, she actually continued to stay at her parents' house and only slept at her uncle's house for a few nights. In other words, the measures taken by the police organization did not have the desired effect. In turn, it was possible to establish that in 2017, only a few months after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, the girl began to suffer from abuse. It most likely began immediately after Andreina enters into relationship with Andreas. The trial was attended by more than 40 witnesses of the accusing party who were able to confirm the fact that Paula had to endure abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the last hearing, before the judge handed down the verdict, Andreina stated that she took sole responsibility for the child's abuse. The woman claimed that she herself had beaten Paula with a belt and at times with her fists. Through this statement, the girl's mother actually attempted to remove blame from Herlan. She said to Rekbeat that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andreina also stated that she chastised her daughter for causing her problems with her new husband. Breaking up with her new husband meant being back on the streets and losing the financial stability she could only have around this man. Taking care of her daughter was her last priority. After becoming acquainted with Paula's life situation, the judges were concerned about the couple's newborn son, but it's safe to say that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It must be said that Andreas has indeed chosen to exercise his right to remain silent and has never made any statement about the incident since his arrest. By the February 3rd, 2021, Paula's trial was finished and the couple was sentenced. Both defendants were found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum sentence for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the accusing party demanded exactly the maximum punishment for the perpetrators, but the chief judge decided to take into account an aggravating factor, namely that Paula was only 4 years old, which means that she could not defend herself against her attackers. As a result, the judge sentenced Andreina and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, the convicts have 3 days to appeal the verdict, so the couple was expected to appeal immediately. Even though Andreina was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, she still remained on house arrest and not went to jail. The fact is that the woman used her opportunity to appeal, so now the higher court needs to confirm her sentence for incarceration. In the meantime, the woman continues to comply with the measures that were originally taken. This is not the case with Andreas, as he was arrested at the time of his appearance at the hospital with the dead girl. Undoubtedly, the fact that Andreina is still at large is causing public indignation and anger. Most importantly, with the anger of Leonardo, who is worried that the woman might take advantage of the situation to escape justice.
Today, we venture into Courtland, a city of contrasts, where the grim realities of gang violence and the illegal trade of prohibited substances are offset by the upstanding native residents. Despite its status as a small town, Courtland and the surrounding Panola County, with a population of 34,000, face their share of criminal activity and dangerous gangs. Regular shootouts and arrests of those involved in illegal trade are commonplace. This negative environment played a pivotal role in our story. On December 6, 2014, at 20:09, emergency services received a report of a vehicle fire on a rural road. The first firefighters to arrive at the scene encountered a blazing Kia Rio and immediately began extinguishing the flames. Inside the car was a hellish scene, with black smoke billowing upwards rapidly. As the rescuers doused the vehicle with foam, they accidentally noticed a dark figure slowly emerging from the nearby underbrush. The silhouette resembled either a young woman or a child. The victim was severely burned and looked like a living corpse. As the figure approached, the firefighters saw it was a young woman, dressed only in her underwear, covered in burns from head to toe. She approached them and asked for help. The unfortunate woman was completely burned. Her clothes had been incinerated, her skin was melting and slowly dripping downwards, and her entire body was bleeding. Her hair had turned into a charred lump of ash. Her face was black with soot. A rescuer wrapped her blistered body in a blanket and laid her on the ground. As they waited for the emergency medical services crew, the firefighters did not leave her side. The young woman, barely moving her lips, tried to utter individual words, which were indiscernible to those around. Considering her condition, she could not speak clearly, but several emergency responders still managed to hear the names Eric or Derek when she was asked who had attacked her. She was airlifted from a small rural town to a hospital in Memphis. However, after sustaining about 93% burns to her body, the young woman passed away 4 hours later. The victim was 19-year-old local resident Jessica Lane Chambers. Jessica grew up in Courtland, living with her mother across the street from her grandmother, while her father and stepmother lived further down the street. She was a petite and fragile young woman, but possessed a steely character. She was raised in a tumultuous family environment, much like many of her friends, relatives, and neighbors. Her father had pleaded guilty to manufacturing methamphetamine and had been arrested for driving under the influence in the early 2000s. In 2006, her 28-year-old neighbor was shot several times in his yard. Growing up in such a negative environment, Jessica did not turn out to be the quiet choir girl. She smoked, quarreled with her parents, had unstable relationships with boyfriends who had legal troubles, and as her family knew, sometimes acted out violently during disputes. Jessica's behavior became more pronounced at 17, following the death of her older brother Alan in a car accident in 2012. She moved out of her mother's home for several months after her mother disapproved of Jessica's new boyfriend. Her childhood was challenging. Her father spent some time in prison, but by 2014, he had been released and was working as a mechanic at the local sheriff's department. Jessica was not afraid to break the law. Occasionally, she sold illegal substances and was affiliated with local gangs. Nevertheless, the sweet and smiling Jessica was respected and liked by almost everyone she knew, making the shocking manner of her demise all the more mysterious. Rumors of a burning car and a deliberate fire-setting incident quickly spread throughout her small hometown. Jessica's father's position in the sheriff's department allowed him to be swiftly informed about the nearby car fire and the incident involving his daughter. Upon hearing the news, his wife ran down the street to tell Jessica's mother about the tragic event.
They reached the hospital while Jessica was still alive. The tragic death of the young woman captured the nation's attention. Hundreds attended Jessica's funeral on December 13th, which was a memorial organized in honor of a joyful teenager, a former student, cheerleader, and a girl who dreamed of rising above her circumstances. A prolonged investigation into this high-profile case soon followed, stirring public interest. The FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals were called in to assist with the local investigation. The initial theory was that the fire resulted from a car accident. However, this was quickly ruled out as no signs of emergency braking or any other obstacles were found at the scene. An examination of the burned vehicle also showed no signs of impact or damage to the body. Thus, the theory was not supported. The primary theory then became arson. But at the time of the incident, the police had very few leads, and the lack of evidence prolonged the investigative process. Investigators questioned nearly everyone who might have been in contact with Jessica in the last days of her life. They even explored the possibility that her boyfriend, who was in prison at the time of the arson, might have ordered her demise. However, this theory was dismissed as he had been living in Iowa since their breakup. Ali Al-Sinai, the owner of a gas station, also came under suspicion. He was one of the last people to see Jessica alive. Ali gave his statement and was released. There was a theory that Jessica had brought trouble upon herself by associating with one of the local gangs. However, the gang members denied their involvement and expressed their condolences to the Chambers family. Many of those called in for questioning had good reasons to lie, even if they didn't know who ended her life. It seemed the investigation was at a standstill. There was neither a suspect nor a motive for such a brutal act. The public pressure on the investigation demanded justice, thereby slowing down the investigative process and repeatedly providing false leads about Jessica's life. Here are some of the theories that were most popular on social media. For instance, locals accused Brian Rudd, Jessica's ex-boyfriend from high school, who might have acted out of jealousy in a moment of intense emotion. Others suggested that Jessica sold someone faulty pills for several $100s, which could have angered a dealer. "This is the most mysterious case I have ever worked on," said District Attorney John Champion, who has been serving in the county for 22 years. He has been working on Jessica's case since December. Together with local detectives, the MBI, FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the U.S. Marshals Service. According to Champion, they have interviewed and in some cases re-interviewed over 130 people, including several individuals named Eric and Derek. Yet authorities have not arrested any suspect so far. After some time, investigators managed to reconstruct the last week of Jessica's life minute by minute, up to her tragic end. On December 5, 2014, after receiving a call on her cell phone, Jessica drove to the M&M Mini-Mark. Following a call from a friend, she purchased $14 worth of gasoline and left in her car at 5:15 p.m. Around 5:45 p.m., she called her mother to say she would return in a little while. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, and she was dressed in camouflage pajama pants. She then made a few more stops, one at an unknown house and another in the nearest town, before arriving at the scene of her tragic end, possibly already accompanied in her car by the person who would end her life. Surveillance cameras also captured a man in a striped shirt refueling a gas can before heading in the same direction as Jessica. However, there were no confirming data about the man's further movements. Cell phone records indicated that she spent about 10-15 minutes near a traffic light on Highway Number 6, heading towards Batesville. The subsequent 62 minutes, between 6:30 p.m. and 7:32 p.m., also known as the mystery hour, took time to unravel. At 7:30 p.m., Jessica's phone showed that she reached the location on Heron Road, where her burning car was later found. So, where did Jessica Chambers go and what led to her brutal fate? The investigation moved very slowly. Only in December 2015, in a separate case involving charges of illegal possession of weapons, controlled substances, and counterfeits, 17 suspected gang members were arrested. District Attorney John Champion did not expect any of the gang members to be directly linked to the case of the burning incident. It turned out that during plea negotiations, all gang members were offered the opportunity to assist the investigation. Thus, the gang members pointed to a certain Quentin Tellis. Then, investigators finally learned who Jessica was with an hour before the fire. But in February 2016, authorities announced a pause in the case to conduct the more detailed investigation and establish a motive. The lack of official suspects only deepened the spread of baseless rumors, which circulated on the internet and then throughout the town. This situation attracted online detectives. A Facebook page called Justice for Jessica was created, offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and a widespread search for her assailant. Rumors also circulated online that Jessica, who had previously dated African-American men, had been targeted by white supremacists for her involvement in interracial relationships. Conversely, online conspiracy theorists suggested that the culprits were African-American because Jessica was in a gang and was perpetrated in retaliation for trying to leave it. However, none of these theories received official confirmation. The investigation became particularly interested in the figure of Quentin Tellis. After revisiting social media and Jessica's cell phone, they identified whom the young cheerleader had been communicating with in the last hours of her life. During the first interrogation, 29-year-old Quentin Tellis recounted that the meeting, which had been arranged by text message, was the only time they met, and he did not know her well, merely asking for a ride home. However, with more comprehensive information than presenting all the messages, Tellis was arrested on charges of ending Jessica Chambers' life through arson. Text messages reveal that Tellis repeatedly sent Jessica requests of a very intimate nature. On the day of the tragedy, Jessica texted Quentin at 9:02 a.m. to tell him she had just woken up, and he replied a few minutes later that he had as well. At 10:09 a.m., Tellis texted Chambers, "I'm ready," shortly after she stopped at the M&M gas station. She was captured on surveillance footage, leaving the M&M a few minutes later, presumably to pick up Tellis. Afterwards, they picked up one of Jessica's friends. Around 10:49 a.m., Jessica dropped Quentin off. Later, around 2:03 p.m., Tellis began messaging Jessica again, this time explicitly asking for some love. This was the fourth message in 4 days in which he requested intimacy via text. Other deleted texts were recovered, including messages like "I'm excited" and "Come lie with me," which Jessica left unanswered. The passenger seat in Jessica Chambers' burned car was pushed back, a position typical for intimate activities in a car. Prosecutors argued that this was evidence that the two were engaged in, or at least attempting, intimacy that tragic evening. On February 24th, Tellus was charged with ending Jessica's life and arson. It took the investigation considerable time to build the case. The first trial in the Jessica Chambers case began in 2017 in Batesville, Mississippi, about 50 miles south of Memphis. The trial was highly publicized with strict security measures in place. Jurors were sequestered and spectators were screened with metal detectors before entering the courtroom. Prosecutor John Champion warned the jurors that they would see disturbing images of the burned Jessica Chambers and hear testimony from about 35 witnesses. Investigators stated that Jessica met Quentin Tellus around Thanksgiving in November 2014. He was 7 years her senior and had attended the same high school before she enrolled there. In October of that same year, he had been released from prison, where he had served time for burglary. FBI agent Dustin Blount testified during the first trial. He met Jessica through a friend at a gas station in Courtland, Mississippi. They spent a lot of time driving around together on multiple occasions. He went as far as to say that they had been intimate. He stated that they had been in the passenger seat, detailing further that the passenger seat was reclined back and he was sitting in the passenger seat with Jessica Chambers sitting on him. In court, John Champion said, "There was a series of text messages between them, even on the day of her demise, in which he requested intimacy. The front seat in the burned car was adjusted downward as Tellus had described during their previous encounter." Champion claimed that Tellus attempted to end her life by strangulation, then, thinking she was deceased, doused her with gasoline and set her alight. A friend of Jessica, who testified, indicated that the three of them had ridden in Jessica's car the day before the incident. Later, Tellus confessed to investigators that he saw Jessica that night, and they went to a fast food restaurant together. Various friends he claimed to have been with when the fire started could not confirm his alibi. He then appeared on a store surveillance camera several miles away, where he was purchasing a phone card for a friend who lived in Louisiana. Tellus did not testify in his own defense at the trial. A central element of the defense was the fact that several emergency responders at the scene of the tragedy reported hearing Jessica utter the name Eric or Derek. Ultimately, 2 jurors reacted to the fact that Quentin Tellus's name sounded nothing like Eric or Derek. Panola County District Attorney John Champion pointed to text messages in which Tellus repeatedly requested intimacy from Chambers. "You will see text messages between them where Quentin is consistently asking Jessica for intimacy, and she is consistently denying him," Champion testified at the first trial. It was proven that there was a series of text messages, even on the day of her death, where he was requesting intimacy from her. Also, FBI agent Dustin Blount shared that during questioning, Tellus admitted to deleting Jessica's contact information and all their text messages from his phone soon after her demise. When asked why, Quentin calmly responded, "I wasn't scared, but once we found out who it was, who had passed there, I just deleted my contact with her, because I didn't want to have a deceased person in my phone, a number in my phone that just wouldn't be used anymore." At the first trial, FBI agent Dustin Blount demonstrated that Tellus and Chambers met through a friend at a gas station in their small hometown of Courtland. "They drove around together a lot, many times," said Agent Blount, who recalled interrogating Tellus. He went so far as to say that they had been intimate at some point. Agent Blount, who spoke with Tellus at his home 11 days after Jessica's passing, asked Tellus to describe the intimate encounter and pinpoint where it occurred. Tellus indicated a driveway south of the house he shared with his mother. Back in December 2014, he lived with his mother in a trailer up the road from the convenience store where Jessica Chambers was last seen before the fire. His DNA was found on the woman's keys, and his cell phone records placed him at that location on the night in question. However, Quentin Tellus continued to maintain his innocence. Defense attorney Darla Palmer, in her opening statement, urged the jurors to disregard the cell phone location evidence, which she argued could not prove that Tellus and Chambers were at the same place. Quentin has always maintained his innocence, telling police in the interrogation room, even after being threatened with capital punishment if it went to trial, "I've told the truth. I did not end Jessica's life. I don't have it in my heart to end anyone's life."
His family claims that the police are merely looking for someone to blame in a case that has become a highly charged racial issue since Tellus, who is African American, was arrested for the death of the attractive white cheerleader. Investigators looked for connections to other recent fires in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. Jessica was a white woman who dated African American men, and she wasn't the first white woman attacked over interracial relationships, but they say they found no links. "I can't tell you how many different theories we've considered," said Champion. "Typically, law enforcement can quickly identify suspects in a homicide through street informants, interviewing witnesses, but no matter how much we've cooperated with people, listening to testimonies, taking DNA swabs, conducting polygraph tests, we haven't come any closer to an arrest." The first trial in 2017 ended in a mistrial due to confusion related to the jury instructions. They stated that a guilty verdict must be unanimous, but did not explicitly say the same for a not guilty verdict. Officials noted that the jurors apparently decided that since they could not unanimously agree on Tellus's guilt, this implied his innocence. By the time of the retrial in 2018, Quentin Tellus was under investigation in Louisiana for the end-of-life of student Ming Chen Xiao, as well as for the illegal use of a stolen bank card. In May 2019, he was charged with second-degree murder in connection with Xiao's demise. The second trial was notably challenging. Jurors were shown a photo of Jessica Chambers, which firefighter Cole had taken upon arriving at the scene. Cole shared that the image of Chambers, her lips blackened with soot, haunted her, and she told jurors, "I see this photo I took every morning and every night." A veteran firefighter stated that he had never seen a victim with such severe burns when he found the young woman lying on the ground, barely able to speak, after she had been deliberately set on fire. She was sitting on a blanket. Her hair was singed, soot around her nose and mouth, blisters all over her body. Cole, the Panola County Director of Emergency Operations, told the jurors, "I sat and held her hand. That's all I could do," said firefighter Cole Haley, holding back tears. "I told her, 'Sweetheart, it's going to be okay.' And she replied, 'I'm going to die.' At that moment, I lay down beside her," Haley recounted. "Her skin was hanging from her lips and her nose," testified paramedic Bradley Dixon. "Her eyelashes and eyebrows were gone. The hair on her head was a warm, matted clump." Testimonies at the second hearing also included a woman named Sherry Flowers, who had not appeared at the first trial of Tellus, but told investigators during questioning that she had picked up a hitchhiker on the night Jessica Chambers was tragically ended. Sherry Flowers did not recognize Tellus in court, and agreed with the prosecutor that she did not know whom she had picked up. However, she told the court that a man flagged her down, and she stopped because she thought it was her cousin. She agreed to give a ride to the man, whom she described as an African-American male, about 20 years old and of slim to medium build. Tellus, who was 5 feet 9 inches tall, was 26 at the time. Initially, Flowers did not reach out to investigators, and when asked why in court, she said, "I couldn't remember and thought it wasn't relevant to the case." Nevertheless, the prosecutors attempted to link this ride to the demise of Jessica Chambers, suggesting it provided Quentin Tellus with the opportunity to leave Jessica's car in order to return and set it on fire. However, the defense contested the timing, and Flowers admitted that she was unsure of the exact time of the ride, only stating, "I know I picked someone up." The investigator also presented that Jessica Chambers' keys were found in the ditch 2 days after her passing, near the spot where the hitchhiker was picked up. The defense objected to the keys being admitted into evidence, arguing it was impossible to prove where the keys had been at the time. During the retrial, jurors were required to visit the sites involved in the crime and hear additional testimony. The second trial was highly emotional. Witnesses broke down on the stand, and spectators wept as photos of the young woman Jessica Chambers' burned abdomen and face were shown. One of the first responders, cheerfully testifying, embraced the girl's father as he stepped down from the stand. In 2018, the second jury also failed to reach a verdict in the Tellus trial, marking the second jury in 2 years to be deadlocked over whether Quentin Tellus was responsible for setting Jessica and her car on fire. Despite the suspect having been tried twice, no conviction was secured.
and the case remains officially unsolved. Nevertheless, online sleuths continue to scour social media for any clue that investigators might have missed, developing their own often outlandish theories about who truly ended Jessica Chambers' life. The demise of Jessica Chambers initially drew significant media attention. Over time, as media interest waned, the story captured the attention of internet detectives worldwide. To this day, one of the most discussed aspects of the Jessica Chambers case is what transpired between her leaving home and her tragic end. According to reports, Jessica left her house at 5 p.m. on the night of the crime, telling her mother she was going to a nearby gas station. Surveillance footage from the gas station shows Chambers there twice. The footage captures Jessica fueling up, then heading toward the store and waving to someone off camera before approaching them. Observers continue to speculate about whom young Jessica was waving at that day. Amateur detectives have tried to crack the case on their own, developing their own theories and sometimes following information that was blatantly false, and at times even harassing the family and friends of Jessica Chambers. These individuals, ranging from conservative bloggers to gluten-free bakers from Montreal, boating enthusiasts from Florida and grocery coupon collectors from North Carolina, claim to seek justice for Jessica above all else. Instead, they have terrorized her once peaceful hometown with their relentless demands for answers to their dubious theories. In the process, they spread rumors that seep into real life, stirring racial tensions, digging up old grudges, and reigniting feuds. For these amateur detectives, Jessica's death is not a mother's tragedy, it's a pastime. Media critics use the term missing white woman syndrome to describe the national obsession with victims who are young, blonde, and white, and Jessica fit all these criteria. A former cheerleader with flaxen hair, weighing just 90 pounds. But those obsessed with Jessica's death are particularly fixated on her tiny hometown. Outsiders can easily track down social media accounts and even phone numbers of Jessica's family members, friends, ex-boyfriends, and sworn enemies, all of whom have reported being contacted by strangers wanting to interrogate them about whether they took the life of the teenager. The police say they still don't know who ended her life and why, leaving the mystery in the hands of online amateur sleuths who may do more harm than good. When does a personal tragedy become a public spectacle? The Justice for Jessica memorial page on Facebook, managed by Jessica's older stepsister, remains popular. It has united many compassionate people from around the world who once heard about the young woman burned alive. People send letters of sympathy, supportive words for the family and friends, and donate books and gifts in Jessica's name. Hanging in Jessica's room is a memorial quilt made of bright pink patches with zebra prints, along with her photo and the dates of her birth and death. The words "secret group" were stitched into the top left square. No one knows what this phrase means, as the quilt, like other gifts, came from around the world. Tragically, Jessica's death did not change the town of Courtland. Everyone knows each other here, and both authorities and locals believe the attack was personal. 29-year-old Quentin Tellis, serving time for a different crime, is not a free man, yet justice for Jessica still has not been achieved. Regrettably, Jessica's mother, Lisa, passed away on October 29, 2021, at the age of 52, without seeing justice served for her daughter. It remains uncertain whether there will be a third trial for the case of the young woman burned alive.